This week, we welcome Tom Williams, the Director of Veterans Operations for the Veterans Mental Health Hackers, to talk about how mental health hackers is going to help veterans in InfoSec in 2020 and beyond. Our second segment is we talk with security news, actually, how Amazon Echo and Kindle devices were affected by a Wi-Fi bug, ransomware and data breaches linked to uptick in fatal heart attacks. A woman was ordered to type her iPhone password so police could search the device, and how the military found marijuana at a North Dakota nuclear launch facility. In the final segment, we air a pre-recorded interview with Mark Dufresne. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Qualys is introducing a new prescription for security, and it's free. Global IT asset discovery and inventory. Activate it today at securityweekly.com/Qualys so you can achieve 100% near real-time visibility across your hybrid environments.
It's Thursday night in New England. Do you know what time it is? No, it's not time for the New England Patriots because they already took care of business on Monday night. It's time for our host, Paul Asadorian, and his Cyber Patriots.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. Is it not the Patriots' job to win tonight?
No, they won on Monday.
Okay,
It's over. It's over for the week.
They're so good they could win even when they're not playing.
That may be true, but...
And I know it's a short time that they have. Just going back and looking at records and dynasties, it's
coming to an end eventually.
Eventually, all good things come to an end, right?
Yes.
So,
but I had to pull in the whole New England Patriots thing tonight.
It's a great place to be. Paul Security Weekly, episode number 624. Welcome everyone. We're recording on October 24th. 2019, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, where Security Weekly CEO Matt Alderman is here with me. Welcome.
I am in the house. Thank you. It's always fun to be here. Crazy week for me. You know, with I hit a milestone tomorrow, but it's so much fun to be in studio with the rest of the team and have so much fun. So I'm glad to be here.
Nice to have you here, Mr. Alderman. On the lines remotely, Tyler Robinson's here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Buenas noches, everybody.
I like the hat thing. You got like the hat thing going on.
Isn't that a little new? Like the no hawk thing? That's kind of going to throw some people off, I'm sure.
I like it. Also on the lines remotely, holding up a really nice glass of what I hope is scotch and or bourbon, is Mr. Lee Neely, sporting his Security Weekly gear. Welcome, Lee.
This is a glass of Jefferson's that Shelley just brought me to ease the show on the way. We're ready to go.
Nice.
It's like Lee, my wife, brings me bourbon. Neely, who also did like the Vanna White thing on his breast. He's like, look, I'm wearing the Security Weekly quarter zip, and here is my right man breast.
Wow.
Exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We are partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you will get a 1 CPE credit per webcast. Register for our upcoming webcast with ServiceNow and Core Security. You can go to the Security Weekly website, the all-new Security Weekly website. Click on the webcast link. Register for upcoming webcasts as well as on demand.
You forgot Great Horn. I think we had a Great Horn today, so I think Great Horn.
And Kevin O'Brien was on
ESW.
Great interview on
Wednesday.
ESW. Make sure you check that out.
And
that
he's coming to
one.
BSW on Monday, which is really interesting.
And doing a webcast.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I listened to that interview on ESW and I'm like, Matt, can we go by that? Like, because we need that. Like, I liked his perspective on the problem of email phishing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And because we're a G Suite company, right? We use G Suite all the time. I'm like, can we get a trial of that?
Yeah,
and kind of integrate it in and address some of our stuff? Yeah.
Really liked it. It's good stuff. All righty. Now, what happened to my teleprompter, Matt? What is going on?
There's another.
Oh, is there another announcement?
Oh, maybe not. That might be in the next segment.
It was just one.
You just fast forwarded too fast. You hit the space button and never hit it to stop it. So,
I'd like to we're going to interview and introduce our guest for this segment. Tom is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran who works for a Fortune 500 company in security incident response. He is leading the Veterans Operations Division of Mental Health Hackers, addressing the unique challenges that veterans in information security face. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Tom, I'm not sure how we first met, likely at a ShmooCon or some other security event, right?
Yeah, I believe it was at I want to say Source in Boston quite a few years ago. And I mean, I've been a fan of the show for quite some time, going back to before the name change.
Nice.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's
and you're based
right
you're in Massachusetts somewhere, undisclosed location.
I am in an undisclosed location in Massachusetts, yes.
Undisclosed bunker.
That's right.
That doesn't look like a skiff.
No, certainly not.
Not
Well,
yet.
Tom, it's nice to actually have you on the show, despite us having spoken at many security events in the past. So,
yeah, it's good to finally be here.
Tom, start out by telling us about how you got your start in information security.
So I did a few years in the Marine Corps, did about a year or so in the Army, and then got into IT, supporting some naval bases in the area, and got interested in security, got involved in the community more, started a meetup where I met some great people, including Bob Rudis, Josh Corman, Bill Pelletier, and from there eventually was able to transition into a dedicated security role about 3 years ago. And I've been doing security incident response ever since.
So, Tom, if I heard you correctly, you talked about the Marine Corps, Army, and Navy. Is that?
Yeah, so I was doing civilian work in the Navy, and was, after I got out of the Marine Corps, went into the Army for about a year before some back issues caused me to have a medical discharge.
Now, Tom, you also spoke about some of the folks involved in the community here in New England that were instrumental. For those of us listening that are looking for a community to get involved in, what advice do you have for them?
I'd say getting out to events. I've met a lot of these people initially on Twitter, and just felt the need that we had such a great community still, even in New England and in many areas where you may have talked to somebody a handful of times on the internet, but you've never gotten together and made the friends and made the connections and made those relationships happen. And I'm lucky that I did, and that's what led me down this path.
It sounds like, Tom, they really pushed you into taking an InfoSec career, correct?
Oh, absolutely. It's a great way to, pull information from those people, as well as, have them help guide you down a better path.
And it sounds like a lot of the local events, right, Tom? I mean, you were networking really locally with a lot of the local cons and meeting these individuals, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's funny how like the local conferences, it sounds like Tom introduced you to folks that were connected to and are connected to cybersecurity across the world.
yeah.
Absolutely. No matter how big the cybersecurity community is, it's still, it's like the Kevin Bacon game. You're only a couple of hops away from all these incredible people.
Yeah, we're not 6 degrees away. We're like 2 degrees away,
2 or
pretty
3,
much from everybody in our community, which is good. I mean, it's great from a networking perspective because you can meet somebody at a local event who has ties into people that are more on a national, global scale that make those connections for your network to really help you out.
But what I think is important is that many of us that have been doing this for 15 or 20 plus years, right, have those connections, but are very open to, if you come to a community event, like Tom came to a community event, there is a vetting process, right? And I know Tom's a very genuine person. Like, oh, you want to work in InfoSec, I'll help you, right? I think that's what's important to underscore about our culture is that the recruitment process is not just an open process, but one that if you want to help us in this mission of cybersecurity, we'll help you, right?
And
definitely.
It's like
and I
constant
think,
giving back.
Yeah, and I think folks out of the military have a really unique perspective on security, right? When you're in the military, your mission is protecting the homeland. And that's a national security kind of concept, right? Which has applicability into securing an organization and the ability to bring those skill sets you learned in the military, the way you think, the way you prepare, those things are really important for organizations to help them actually do a better job of protecting their own organization, not at the scale of the nation, but still, I think, really relevant skill sets in our industry.
Absolutely.
So,
and it's great to see that there are a lot of organizations who are recognizing that and are trying to bring veterans into cybersecurity more.
kind of a question around that. What do you see some of the biggest differentiators and advantages of coming out of the military and bringing that kind of experience into the commercial realm? And then to follow that on, like some of the disadvantages or the trials that you've had to kind of face as bringing that background as a sole background.
So I'd say one of the big advantages of veterans trying to get into the community is that we tend to be very focused on learning. So there's the ability to pick up a concept that might not be something you're super familiar with, but you'll put your head down, focus on it, and pick things up relatively quickly. And then there's the also innate ability that it's kind of dragged into us or pushed into us to follow when you need to follow and lead when you need to lead. And that's every company needs people who know where they should be and what their hierarchy is and how to make the best out of that. And then as for challenges, that's the transition from the mindset of this is who I've been for the last 3, 4, 20, 30 years. It can be tough to suddenly have to adjust to being a completely different person. And fortunately for a lot of people, that transition goes smoothly, but for a lot of people it doesn't. Mm-hmm. So it's always a new challenge every day.
Do you have any good advice or recommendation for those of us that have spent most of our time in the commercial sector, how to help or better facilitate a lot of the veterans trying to come in? They're bringing great experience, they have fantastic skill sets, and the mindset is obviously very, very applicable. What are some of the things that we can do to facilitate that better and maybe draw in a bigger veteran crowd for recruitment?
So I think a lot of it has to do with understanding the terminology. A veteran may not know 100% exactly how to target their resume, but if you understand that this particular individual has these set of skills and accept where their place is and how they're willing to learn, they can do a lot of great things.
Well, one thing I've always appreciated, and we've talked about this on previous shows on the network, is that, I learned by experience working under pressure, right? Like even in my early days where I was administering a token ring network and I accidentally unplugged the wrong cable, and Matt's already laughing, right? Because he knows once that token doesn't have a full ring, because ring is a literal term in this sense, the whole network goes down, right? And I learned that in a very safe facility with people who were mentoring me, with users who were somewhat understanding, and I broke the ring and I had to work under pressure, right? What the veterans bring into that scenario is working under pressure, not in an IT setting, but in oftentimes situations that your life and your coworkers or other soldiers' lives in your team, their lives too, right? And the ability to work under pressure, I think, is something that is extremely important in IT and security, especially because when that breach happens and you discover it, like, it could be basically life or death for that company, right? Not actual people. It could be people's lives at line. Certainly when we talk about critical infrastructure and the like, but the life of that company and the ability to work under pressure, keep a level head under pressure, is such a valuable skill. Tom, if you could speak towards that, how I think those skills and that training really transfer.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. It's that ability to, keep a cool head and know how to step back and evaluate what's going on and be able to best frame out the situation and accomplish the mission as quickly as it needs to go. And
what's funny, Tom, is I've got 3 kids at home, right? And a lot of dogs. Very crazy household. And I'll sometimes tell my wife, and of course she's my wife, so she can disagree and dismiss my comments.
She might.
At whatever.
She might do it while we're on the show.
And that's totally fine, right? But I'll be like, we need to just prioritize and execute. And it speaks to what Tom was talking about, and it speaks to what we deal with in IT and security all the time, right? There's an event that happened. If you freak out about it, that's not doing anyone any good, right? If you look at the problem at hand and you can prioritize what I need to do, what my team needs to do, and then execute on that in priority, that's a huge value. When there's a security incident and you have to look at all the things that are going wrong and be like, all right, this person needs to go do that, and that's their priority. Prioritization and execution is, I think, one of the most valuable skills that we can learn from our military and armed forces that translate into not just security incidents, but Paul's life at home when things are going, crazy. That ability is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of prioritize and execute, I actually do have both of Jocko's books on my bookshelf right behind my laptop.
What was his first book, Tom?
The first book.
What was it called?
I actually don't remember.
Ultimate Ownership, something like that.
Extreme Ownership.
Thank you. Yeah, but essentially that comes down to the prioritize and execute mentality.
Right. And I think
you're the leader. You own everything. If anyone else on your team makes a mistake, you own it. And the way you overcome those mistakes, largely in his lessons, right, is that prioritize and execute mentality.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the training in the military. Right, because you have this command and control structure that's in place, which is great, right? But things happen in the battlefield, right? And training kicks in when things go wrong, the leader is no longer the leader, and somebody has to step up and take control.
Right. Think about every security incident we've ever dealt with collectively as hosts and listeners, right? Someone had to step in, provide that leadership role, and help the team prioritize and execute at a very fundamental level.
And it's a fundamental training in the military that I don't think most other people experience in their day-to-day learning, right? We go to college, we do our things, we drink too much beer, we get sick, we get out with a degree.
We get out, we show up, we go to work. Right.
But in the military, it is the way of life. This is life or death for a lot of the men and women on our front lines. And that training teaches them, because I wasn't, so it teaches them what that structure looks like. And when things go wrong, somebody steps in and they continue to execute on that mission.
How to deal with those tremendous challenges.
Exactly.
Right? Which is often what we face in a lot of people face, right, in their daily jobs, but IT and security being one, right? Tremendous challenges. We've been breached. Now what?
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot succeed unless somebody steps up and recognizes that, I'm the guy who needs to make something happen here, and you do.
Yeah.
So,
Lee.
when people are running around with their chicken like a chicken with their head cut off, do you feel like you're any more equipped for getting them to calm down and focus on what's important because of the training you've had and
It's a
background?
great question, Lee.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that can be applicable. You understand how to maintain a cool head and help others take that step back, realize the full scope of things, and then after you have that deep breath, go back and attack the problem.
Well, Tom, and you hit the nail on the head, right? When we talk about extreme ownership and a lot of military missions, right? In this example, Navy SEAL missions to work with Iraqi forces and to train them. If no one in that dynamic, U.S. military special forces plus Iraqi forces, if no one had that calm demeanor and ability to prioritize and execute, no one would learn, right? And I think that in this case, the SEALs example is through training, they maintain a level head in times of extreme chaos and can lead the team to teach people like Iraqi forces. So lead it back to your example, right? Having those senior people in IT that when people are running around like they're chickens with their heads cut off, you can maintain that level head and say, no, this person go do that, this person go do that kind of thing.
And it doesn't even need to be the senior person. It could be the ability of anybody to recognize that this is the best route forward.
Yeah.
Pass that information up to the next person in their chain, and just make things happen.
Yeah, and we've seen scenarios of this in crazy situations. I mean, we all know the story of Benghazi. The movie's been out there. I mean, think about what those guys were under from a tremendous pressure, but they knew how to get themselves to a position where they could do the things that they could do, but with a very level head, right?
And it's interesting that what you
times of
described
pressure
is what they now call the Battle of Ramadi, which doesn't get some of the press as other military battles, but that's, I think, why Tom and I and others really latch on to Jocko's work, where he talks about those extreme stress situations. And in this case, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Battle of Ramadi, right, that really taught those lessons as one of the more modern historic references to military conflict that it teaches us these lessons of operating under extreme stress.
Yeah, absolutely. You may be detached from your chain, from your leadership, and it may be due to technical problems. It may be due to geological problems. So you may be spread apart throughout the world, and you need to recognize what needs to be done, how to step up, and how to solve those problems.
All very relevant skills in the enterprise.
Yeah,
when you think about incident response and the role you're in today, Tom, and the ability to realize we have a breach or we're in the middle of an attack, and the ability to assess the situation and start to come up with a game plan on, okay, where do we go from here, right? The military folks, again, back to their training, have this just instinctive ability to figure out how to come up and start to lead in those situations under extreme stress, which are valuable skills to an organization that is under an attack in the middle of a breach, that can also create a cool, calm head in the room, but also know, look, these are the things we need to do. And because, I think that is
in
just
IT and security, most of the time, majority of the time, no one's shooting at you.
Yeah, that's true.
Hopefully not, no.
Right? And we're lucky and very grateful and thankful to those who defend our country, right? But that's the skills they bring to the table.
Yes.
And when we talk about the Battle of Ramadi, like, soldiers were under fire a lot of the times in that environment, right? And taking those, learning from those lessons, largely what we're talking about with Jocko's work. Does Jocko have a podcast now? I think he was kind of pushing in that realm, right?
Yeah, he's going on, I think, 300-something episodes at this point.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Wow, that's crazy. That's good.
So kind of around that stress, like your experience and bringing some of that to the industry. Obviously, security industry is very, very stressful. It's a high pressure job. We're all very high performers. Is that kind of one of the determining factors that kind of brought you around to the Mental Health Hackers organization and kind of what that organization is trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, we've been trying to do a lot of great things. I met Amanda at right around when Mental Health Hackers first started at DerbyCon last year, and just was amazed by the things that were being done to try to, it's recognizing that we've all faced issues, we've had problems, and this is how this particular person has addressed those issues and tried to make them, how to improve themselves and then pass those things along to others. And veterans have faced unique challenges that hopefully the average person hasn't faced, and it could mess with your head. It could even just the issues with adjusting back to a civilian lifestyle can cause some adjustment issues. So we're trying to, through Mental Health Hackers, just recognize that we've all been there. This is what we did to normalize ourselves and pass those lessons on to others.
Yeah, are there?
What are you finding? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there certain things that folks in the military, are there tips or tricks to help them? Because we've talked to various folks. Aaron came out of the military into the commercial civilian world. What are some of those things that you really kind of focus on when it comes to that transition? Because I think that transition is such an important component, right? Because when you're in the day-to-day battle and people are shooting at you, and you think about that from what it just does to you mentally, what are some of those things you try to focus on to help these people through that transition process? Because I think that's a really important part of what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with that is, you need to recognize that others have done it and have, seen the same things that you have and have adjusted back to a normal life. And it could be, falling back to your training where you're taught resiliency and how to handle that stress. And you just need to adjust what your focus is and recognize that, this is your new mission. You've gone from, having this one particular job where you must be doing this thing all the time. And now your mission is to become a civilian again and use those skills that you learn to, take this next step into your new life.
Yeah. It's a very difficult transition, I think, for a number of folks in our military that have seen just some of the worst atrocities, it has.
And,
it's a huge impact.
There's no comparison, right? I want to set that as a precedent for this, conversation. And, we read the books and watched the movies about Chris Kyle, and I think many of us in security, and again, the stress is there's no comparison, right? But we experience challenges, we try to overcome them, and as a way, I think, to cope with that, we like to teach other people, right? And that was Chris Kyle's mission. The way he overcame the things that he was dealing with when he got back was to teach other people. Obviously, unfortunate circumstances followed from that, but I think many of us in security feel the same way. If you're worthy, or we believe you're worthy, we'll transfer that knowledge and teach you as a way to cope with all the things that we've seen in security, which again don't compare to the things that are seen in the battlefield, but I think it's a very similar parallel. Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts on on that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. It's that the knowledge transfer is really key. You've done this, and now there's someone else coming up behind you, and you need to assist them in basically any way possible to help them become as successful as they possibly can.
Yeah,
So I
go ahead, Lee.
got a question for you. So, we've talked a lot about what the vets have to go through, relearning how to be a civilian. But are there things that the employers, the couple of things that they really need to get before the journey is going to be successful, or is it really all on the vet?
I think employers can recognize that veterans have those those unique skills. It's the ability to know when it's time for you to lead, know when it's time for you to follow. They have that, again, the prioritize and execute mindset, and just the ability to basically run face first into a challenge that the average person who is coming straight out of college or an internship may not necessarily have. And it's also just be willing to give the average veteran a chance. They may not have 100% of the skills that you're looking for in this particular role, but give it 6, 12, 18 months. They will focus on whatever that particular job is, learn those skills, get those certifications, and come all the way up.
Yeah, and I had similar conversations with Aaron Black Hat this year, right? Ernst & Young in the UK definitely has a program in place at the corporate level to really bring some of those military folks in, because they realized the skill sets apply, right? And they were very open from that perspective to bring these folks in. And incident response seems to be one of those areas where people who are under pressure, looking at data and analyzing data and making decisions, it seems to be a really good fit. And in E&Y, in that particular case, definitely saw a value of bringing those military folks in. That's where Aaron is now. And I think that's important to realize where those kind of skill sets from the military really fit into an organization when it comes to an overall security program, and then figure out how to make that transition easier. His experience was fantastic. I'd love to see other organizations do things similar where they really embrace the military to come into those roles where they can be really effective in an overall organizational security program.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Tom, how did you get involved with Amanda at the Mental Health Hackers, who's awesome, by the way?
Yeah, great person. She's been a great guest on you guys' show a handful of times as well. So after seeing what Mental Health Hackers started at that first DerbyCon that they were actively involved in, I started volunteering, got to know everybody, got into the Slack, and then recognized that there is a lot of veterans within the cybersecurity space, and Mental Health Hackers is trying to help address those mental health challenges that everyone faces, but veterans are also facing unique mental health challenges from just the various things that you may or may not have seen in your time in service. And we're trying to help people adjust to those unique challenges.
It's so well put, and because there are many that didn't have the same view on what mental health hackers and many of us are doing in the security community, but Tom was like, hey, I want to help, and that's awesome.
Yeah, that's basically it. I asked if I could be that person, and Amanda and the team agreed, and here we are.
So Tom, what's next? How do you help people moving forward?
So for now, I think our biggest thing is trying to get more veterans involved in Mental Health Hackers to recognize what we're doing. And we've been trying to push that out on Twitter and the various social networks, as well as just getting our name out there in various villages at the at security conferences that are going on nationwide and even worldwide. So I'm going to be running the Mental Health Hackers Village at B-Sides, Connecticut in about 2.5 weeks.
Nice.
I don't think we have anything going on after that for the rest of the year, but I think things will slowly ramp up as we start getting into summer and all the various conferences that are going on.
And if there are military folks out there that want to get more information, where should they go, Tom? Where should we point them to get more information about how to get involved?
So if people want to get more involved with Hackers Health, I would have them send us a DM on Twitter. Again, it's @HackersHealth. That can get us into our Slack. We have a dedicated Slack channel for the Veterans Division of Mental Health Hackers, and we're just going to go from there.
Outstanding.
Great.
Tom, this is the first time you've appeared on Paul's Security Weekly, correct?
It is, and I believe you're going to ask me the questions.
I am going to ask you the Security Weekly 5 questions, and clearly you are ready to play Well, whether you're ready or not, we're going to ask you anyway. Security Weekly, 5 questions.
Of course.
All righty. Tom, 3 words to describe yourself.
Veteran, beard, ginger.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I've always liked the icicle.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
How to fail and pick yourself back up.
The easiest question of the bunch. In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I do prefer to go first.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents. Matt?
Live, dead, otherwise.
Fictional or
otherwise.
otherwise, yes.
So I would go with Ted Danson, but Cheers era Ted Danson, and Angelina Jolie.
Wow, that's a good mother. Just saying.
It would
Just
be.
saying.
Just saying.
Kind of, I think your mom's hot is what we're saying.
Yeah, basically.
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 You're fictional or non-fictional mom.
Fictional. Yeah, semi-fictional.
Yes. Well, Tom, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And with that, we'll take a short break and come back to talk about the security news. Stay tuned.
NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/securityweekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Daily. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks. Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. This is the security news. Quick announcement. We're currently running... My teleprompter is going the wrong direction. We're currently running two surveys, 5 stages of automation maturity, and our annual listener feedback survey. You can go to securityweekly.com, click the survey link and our menu on our new website. If you'd like to participate in our 5 stages of automation maturity, you can do so, and there'll be a webcast in November detailing our analysis of the results, as well as the 2019 listener survey. Of course, helps us create content that is within your interests and helps us target our sponsors so that the people listening can hear from sponsors that they might actually be inclined to buy. I think it's really, is that,
Yeah, and
am I oversimplifying that? That's really the issue, right?
I mean, we really want to know what topics our listeners want to hear, right? We want to make sure we're bringing the right sponsors on to talk about those issues. We want to make sure we understand how people want to consume content on the network, right? A lot of the changes in the website came from last year's listener survey. Right. To make that better, and what else do we need to do at Security Weekly?
I do listen to podcasts, right? And they've got a lot of podcasts you listen to, right, have a wide variety of sponsors, right? Could be mattresses, could be meal prep services. I've bought mattresses online because of those ads and meal prep services, right? What we've decided to do here at Security Weekly, because we have that background and still practicing information security today, we want our sponsors to be relevant to your job in InfoSec today.
Yeah, and we really want to make sure we are addressing the challenges and problems organizations face, bringing the right sponsors on to talk about how they're solving those problems, and we want that really good alignment. And so we're not going to advertise mattresses and food prepreration services. We're going to try to bring you solutions that hopefully help you in your day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, agreed. Are there more announcements?
No, but there's a bunch of people in the background. So
there's people lurking right now.
Mm-hmm, so there are
a lot of people lurking. It's like the entire team.
Happy birthday, Mr. Matt Alderman.
Yes. So for those of those who don't know, tomorrow is officially my 50th birthday. And
1969.
1969. My T-shirt is 69 Classic. Yeah. If you were a car, you would be a 1970, because cars were built in 69 in the fall of 69 to be branded as 70. And I am a 69 baby, but all the classic cars are 70s. So yeah, I turn a milestone tomorrow officially, and I wanted to spend it here with the team. Yeah,
we should have got you 2 bottles, right? To have 25 year.
Yeah,
to make 50.
225s would make 50. Where's the other one?
Where's the other one? We should have another 20.
Toast to Matt here.
Oh, thank you.
We just put a ×2 on the.
Thank you. But I could, when I think about the last year being here at Security Weekly, what a better way to celebrate a milestone than spending time here in studio with the team, doing stuff that we just love to do. And to me, this was a great honor to be able to come in here in studio and spend my 50th. We weren't sure whether we could or not. Normally, I would come in next week, which is Halloween week. But, my mom was bugging me to come back to Ohio because not only did I turn 50, two of my sister-in-laws turned 50, and my mom was bugging me for a long time to come back. And so I took the family to Ohio last weekend, and I said, well, I'm already most of the way across the country.
Yeah,
why not come in here?
Right.
Get to celebrate my birthday in studio with the family, the Security Weekly family.
With 25-year-old scotch, which I hope you're going to open because we've got a couple of glasses.
We do. We do. We definitely do. I think we're going to get to that. We got to finish probably a couple of martinis.
I tell you what, though, the reason I selected that, one, it comes in a nice box with a scroll that when you get home or whatever, we'll ship that to you if you can't take it home.
I can probably check it. It just means I check bags tomorrow, which is normally what I don't do.
We're going to get it to you. But the scroll, when you take it out, describes the scotch like it's almost a sexual experience. It describes everything that you're experiencing with the scotch in excruciating detail, the aroma, the flavor, the taste, all of that. It describes in a scroll that's tied up with a ribbon inside the wooden box. And I don't know, connoisseur might be the wrong term, but I drank a lot of scotch in the past 20 years or so or whatever.
So have I.
Maybe not even 20 years. Maybe
not quite
10 years.
Yeah, probably more 10 years for me too.
Scotch is like an old man kind of thing or older person kind of thing. There are women, of course, that enjoy scotch as well, but it's an acquired taste.
It is.
You don't find a lot of younger people that are like, oh, I'm going to go sip a 25-year-old scotch, and that's not a racist thing or a stereotypical thing. That's just what I've observed.
We're going to start with Mad Dog 2020, and we're going to work our way up to, different things. I didn't enjoy scotch.
No, I didn't either.
For a long time.
When I was younger, I was like, wait, whiskey's whiskey. What are the different... Whiskey is something you shoot in a shot glass, right? And then you kind of make this weird progression to where you're older and weirder. You think you're more refined, but you're really just weird, where you drink scotch with no ice and you're sipping this 25-year-old scotch that costs way too much money.
Way too much money.
Wow, this is really good, right? It's a weird thing.
For me, it was, I went to Scotland in, I think it was 2012. So it's only been 7 years since I really have gotten into scotch. And the reason for that is in my early days, I had a really good friend of mine that loved Glenlivet Scotch, which to me has this grassy taste to it, and it wasn't my style, and so I never really understood the beauty of Scotch. And in 2012, when I was with RSA, I got to go to Edinburgh and flew my wife over for the weekend, and she's like, "We're going on a tour. We're going to go to a Scotch distillery." And I'm like, I don't like Scotch. She's like, "Yeah, but we're in Scotland. You got to do it, right?"
You got to do it, yeah.
You got to do it.
There's a law.
There's a law. I guess there is a law, Lee. And we go to Glengoyne, and you're going through seeing the distillation process. You're like, yeah, okay, I get it, right? Grains.
It's science. I mean, it's basically science.
There's a science
what
behind
it boils down
right?
to is
But
science.
at the end of the tour, they pour you a glass, and they're like, okay, take a sip. And I'm like, ugh. And they're like, okay, that's what most people think. Now they're like, take a little dropper and put a couple drops of water in the top.
Mm-hmm.
And now take a drink. And what that water does, for anybody who's not a scotch drinker and doesn't like scotch, trust me, try this. You put a couple drops of water in it, and it breaks the surface tension, allows that air in, and it allows that air to kind of mix with the scotch. And when you take that next sip, it's so much better. It's so smooth, and you're like...
Why a lot of people will just say scotch on the rocks.
Right. Ice cubes do it, but putting real good single malt scotch on rocks is like a sin.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a sin.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But people do it because you get the same effect. You break that surface tension, the oils, it allows it to diffuse, and you take that sip, and you're like, wait, that's good. The first one was like, yeah, but that's good. And then they pour, yeah, it does. It opens it up, right, Lee? And then they start pouring all the later versions. You're like, oh my God, this only gets better with time. Mm-hmm. And then you start to understand the appreciation of Scotch.
Well, like you, Matt, being 50 now, you get better with time. Just like Scotch. It gets better with time, right?
So some would say and others would say not, but it's all right. Thank you.
I'm 7 years into this decade, and I think it's getting better all the time.
There you go.
Look, if you love what you do, which I do, don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
I mean, this last year, we're what, 7-8 days away from my 1-year anniversary with Security Weekly.
Already?
Yeah, November 1st is when I came over full-time with Paul. And the year we've had as a team is amazing. And I wouldn't trade this in for the world. I am not a big corporate guy. I never have been. Look, I've had my ups and downs in the career. I've learned a lot through this. But
literally a selling point was, I'm like, Matt, you realize that if you do this and you come on, and we say this of all the hosts largely have realized this from the beginning. We get to sit around, drink whatever we want, have cigars, and basically talk about security. And I've really, truly, from episode 1 of this first show, right? Like, that's what we do, right?
And,
like,
I never got exposed to the podcast until I was doing the work at Tenable when you reported to me. And I got exposure to the show, and I'm like, oh, my God, this is a great environment.
I'm actually like, holy shit, we get to sit around and drink and smoke cigars and talk security. And, like, that's, like, your job? I'm like, yeah.
Pretty much.
And so, I want to make this my job. I did, and then Matt did. Like,
right. And then Paul said, look, I can't pay you that much money. And it wasn't about the money. Paul goes like, when you come here, you can smoke as much as you want and drink as much as you want, and we get to talk about security all day. I'm like, and I stepped back and I thought about that for a second. I'm like, what's better in life? I'm like, I'm in. And here we are, a year later, almost a year later. Not quite, but pretty darn close.
But the most rewarding thing, though, is when we go to conferences like Hacker Halted, which we most recently went to, and people tell us things like you were telling me today that Matt was like, professors in colleges recommend their students listen to this show as part of their learning. I'm like, I know. I'm like, it's kind of scary. I know. But that's what I've
part of
heard
curriculum now,
which is great.
Which is why we had a ton of students show up and actually come up to the booth and it's like, we listen to your show. It's part of our curriculum. Think about that for a second from an impact perspective. I mean, we're guys that have been doing this for a long time before security was sexy. I mean, security wasn't sexy when we were doing this in the 90s, Lee. You probably maybe closer to the 80s, right?
Well, yeah, but it's still relevant, though. It was not sexy. It was not cool. Who wanted to do security back then?
Right. And I got lucky to get into the space and do the things that we've done over the years. But now students are listening to us because we're a source of information into like the relevancy of what they're learning in school. And I thought that was just a great
But now take one of our first stories as an example. An interview will air next week, I think really was one of the first ones in some time that forced me to think differently about IoT security. And we all read these articles. Mm-hmm. This one happens to come from Tech Republic. And I'm not saying it's wrong in any way. But, the 5 best practices for IoT security. I'm like, okay. I mean,
don't put in default username passwords.
They're like take note of every endpoint added, which means do asset management right, align operational technology, IT, and security. Okay. I mean, it's a very fluffy article. And I think that when we put ourselves in the room with people that are smarter than us, right? And
there's a lot of them, by the way.
Afforded the luxury that people would bring on. I'm like, thank God I'm not the smartest person in the room. And IoT security is an area that obviously I've focused on and looked at. And I hear very few folks that offer creative and innovative solutions for that, right? And the folks from Qualys, like Sumed and Philippe, were talking about, well, Obviously passive checking on the network is one way, but also interfacing with the APIs. And they presented the concept of vulnerability management and understanding what's on the device as a function of there's a client that interfaces with our API and or uses their API to send us data, right?
Right.
Cloud provider to cloud provider and or some type of SDK. They presented their agent as an SDK to say, and I've noticed this as well, when I create an IoT device, it has an API associated with it. Why can't you just send that data to somewhere? Operationally, that's one thing, make the device work. Number two, provide some visibility into potential vulnerabilities and or security exposures that exist on that device. That was an opportunity to say, well, like, let's take, I don't know, Ring, I like to use an example because I like their security model. They push out fixes. If Ring was collecting information about all their devices, sending that to another cloud that could analyze it for vulnerabilities, then taking action based on that on behalf of their customers, that's a scenario that I had not considered before in terms of IoT security. I'm like, that was really cool. Now, obviously, it still requires the security, or not the security, but the vendor, like Ring, who's not a security vendor, to care enough about security to make those improvements and relationships to benefit their customers. Lee?
Well, I was going to say, I think it was Ring a year or more ago, it came out that they were like doing searches for compromised passwords that were being used on Ring accounts and alerting the users to go change their passwords because it was a compromised password. I mean, it's a little creepy, but it's really pretty cool and proactive.
Yeah, I use Ring as an example because I think that they have very much built a security culture, and even though they've had vulnerabilities, they have fixed them very quickly.
Yeah,
addressed them, been transparent about all of them, and provided the facilities to update all of their devices.
But I think the interesting thing we got out of that interview, which will air next week, is that when people think about IoT, they're like, well, how do I get that data? Right? You can't put an agent on those devices. They're not really structured for an agent. They don't run normal operating systems.
You could, but you don't control the code to put an agent on it.
Exactly.
It's not like major operating systems like Windows, Mac OS, or Linux, where you can install an agent on them. The firmware-based devices, you don't have that package in software infrastructure to put a software package on them.
But what I thought was really interesting and what Qualys has done, not to give too much away in that interview, is that by coding to their SDKs, you could send a set of data. The manufacturers can now send a set of data elements to Qualys' platform to analyze that from a vulnerability and security perspective, which is a unique concept because how else do you manage these? How else do you potentially check security in these environments? Just very insightful. It's the fifth on the list. And I get it, but I still think there's a couple things missing on this list in the top 5. The first thing I would think about is no default usernames and passwords. It's not on this list. Vulnerability assessments down at the bottom, but how are you going to do vulnerability assessment on IoT devices when you don't even know where these devices are? You're not going to scan them on the network like we talked with the Qualys folks. You're not going to have access to this. But if I can build an SDK that gives certain data elements back and really analyze that data for a vulnerability, that's a game changer in this particular space.
What was interesting to me was that it really put security more, the way they presented it was putting security more in the hands of the researchers, in that, let's say we know that an IoT device of this version has a backdoor because we took it upon ourselves to rip apart that firmware and find the vulnerability. We can build those checks in, query those devices and or the cloud they're using to say, I know that version has this backdoor, and if you got that, it's totally vulnerable. I don't have to scan that device. I don't have to even test the password. I can do that in a lab. We talked about security. The big takeaway for me in context of this article is we talked about security in that it is the ability of the security researcher or security person to do the threat modeling and do the testing to find conditions that this means there's a vulnerability, and then provide the operations team with the ability to find that and discover that in your environment. And to me, that was a huge. I'd never really truly put security in that context.
Right.
We're really just like testers and threat modelers to everything. We've been forced. The other thing I took from the interview in relation to this, we've been forced to be the practitioners, to say we have to go and install, implement, and maintain a WAF and a firewall and an IDS system to do security.
Right.
The transition for me was we get away from those operational elements. Now, what's interesting, I think, in career path-wise, you have to understand those operational elements. You may have to work in IT, I think, to be truly effective, to say, I've walked a mile to deploying a system or an application, whatever that looks like in the future, and I understand all of these controls. When I'm security, I'm threat modeling, I'm testing, and making recommendations to go back to implement control however you implement that.
Yeah, and I think the other interview that we did on Enterprise Security Weekly a couple of weeks back with Finite State on analyzing the firmware on IoT and some of the other things.
Very true.
When you tie those two combinations together, right? The analysis of the firmware and looking for vulnerabilities in the firmware and trying to address that at the firmware level, great. That is a component. But then when you can also do this stuff when these firmwares are running in production and the ability to collect that data, analyze it, contextualize it, and identify things at runtime is another component. And when you bring those two capabilities together, you get a really nice a way to address IoT security in a way we haven't thought about it today in general, which is there's a firmware level, but then there's also some data levels at runtime, and you correlate that stuff and you drive an effective security model around IoT.
Right.
I think that's the only way that IoT is actually going to improve, right? Because IoT is a low cost, low production, and security is a low return on investment for most of these IoT companies. So embedded firmware, chips, things that are using all these are like low cost. And in order to integrate security, they really do have to put that back into the researcher's hand and provide access and tools. And if they give more visibility around, say, like layer 7, or they're doing some of the next gen stuff where they're looking at the application layer and the data layers together and doing anomaly detection, while doing and providing firmware SDKs for access to things that we would otherwise not have access to, they're basically getting free security testing, and the return on investment for something they weren't going to do anyway is huge, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true, Tyler, right? I mean, these are low-cost chips. These are low battery, low power, low whatever, right? We're not going to solve this in the traditional way we've ever attempted to do security in general. And so if we can offload some of that through SDKs and some of these other practices, it actually makes the IoT environment potentially a lot more secure without a lot of overhead for the manufacturers as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
To play the devil's advocate on that side, though, with these SDKs and we call it layer 7 analysis pieces, and where that data is able to go, like through the API, now we have, as consumers, thinking of it from my consumer side, we have security and privacy concerns that, how well are these companies securing those APIs? Where's that data going? What, like for the Ring thing, how are they looking at the passwords for that? Like, are those going across clear text, or are they decrypting them? That means there's a static key. Like, these are security concerns for me, knowing how a lot of these companies are secured on their corporate side. That's a big deal.
Tyler, as we, and I think about it over the past couple of years, and really today, heavily thinking about how security becomes, how do I secure the application, and how do I secure how that application talks to something else in a bidirectional manner? That's through an API. How do I authenticate that, right? And what I'm observing, let's take that into outside of the enterprise into my home for a moment. All these IoT devices running in my home, the devices themselves, sometimes the cloud, have available APIs where I can gather information. Now, over the past couple of years, I think they've learned that there needs to be some level of authentication. But what data do I authenticate and what do I don't? If I'm not authenticating the request, the information I'm giving up, what implications does that have? We've all seen where mobile devices, the security is atrocious. We've seen news articles this week where we talked about putting malicious Android and even iOS apps into the store. Apple actually just banned a dozen or so apps in their store. The app running on your phone is a huge attack vector to interfacing with everything that's on your home network. What information can I gather and then use in subsequent attacks that's not being authenticated? And what implications does that have?
Take that a step further now and look at something like executive targeting that we do for very large organizations, or even just from a threat profile. Organizations often have remote workers. They have people coming into corporate environments. They have laptops that are remote, that are at home. Being able and just having these cloud services within inside the network, we can identify that you're running a QNAP just based on layer 3 traffic that's traversing the internet and having sources to view that kind of traffic. Well, we now know you have a QNAP. There's a nice threat profile that we can maybe gain access to your internal network that may be connected through VPN to your corporate network. So not only from a consumer side and knowing what all these cloud services are leaking outside as far as who you are and what you do, from a corporate side, from executives and all this remote workforce and free work from home stuff, that's a huge target and threat vector. I think that we're just starting to scratch the surface on. I think a lot of the threat actors have been using this for a long time.
As you know, right, and many of us, that security is too complicated, right? All of these different small little avenues are basically part of the complexity that when I have a phone and I have a home, let's just put it in that context. What do I allow my phone to do? What do I allow the IoT devices in my home to do? And what is all that communications and how exposed is it? Mm-hmm. The complexity, I struggle. I've been in technology since I was like 7 years old, right? I struggle with that. I'm like, do I allow my browser to be an app that's authorized to download unsigned applications? And then when I get into my home, how do I provide authentication and authorization for what happens on the maybe half a dozen to almost a dozen different systems that I could implement within my home? That gets infinitely complex very, very fast.
And you're a technologist.
I'm a security professional. How do I?
How does the layperson figure this stuff out?
How do we make it easy for the layperson to go, I want to be secure, right? How do we make it that easy to be like, I want to be secure? Today, I think you lose way too much usability and functionality if you want to be way on the left of secure, right?
Yeah. I mean, I get home, I can open up my Wi-Fi connections and look at all the SSIDs being broadcast without protections. I don't even broadcast my SSID, right? That's what I mean. From a layperson perspective, they don't know the difference. And when you think about IoT in that mix, it makes it even more complex for them to figure out how to secure these environments.
Oh, but then you get into the more of the smart home stuff with Zigbee, and then you have Z-Wave, and then you have Bluetooth, and all these other protocols that even if you were looking on the network, which is largely going to be abstracted from security, right? Then you have all these other protocols that play on top of it.
Yeah. So I think that comes back to something that you apply as a pen tester, an offensive security-minded person, right? As you're doing a scoping engagement, or you're looking at your threat profile as a company, how mature are you? What is your threat risk? What is your threat profile? Who are the people that are going to attack you? And what is your overall maturity and risk tolerance? So taking those aspects from a personal standpoint, or even a pen test standpoint, you have to get your pen test company to accurately simulate the tactics of what they're trying to emulate, which is the threat actors that are coming against you.
And Tyler,
you have to do both of those.
But what you're saying is very smart, because much could you persist before I detected you, right? Like, I think it's really cool that I can go into my man cave and I can control my lights with my phone, right? But if there was an elite pen test team coming out, how long would it take me to recognize that someone was mucking with my stuff, right? It's all about recognizing that dwell time.
Yep.
I think regular users might have a really tough time.
They would,
right? We have a little bit of a better time,
will.
but it's a cat and mouse game. How long do you have to dwell before you can do real damage versus when someone or something detects you?
Yeah, and honestly, most of the attackers are leveraging these home consumer networks, these home computers. The botnets are in more play today than people realize. They haven't hit the news. They're not as widely researched, but really all of the severe attacks that we're seeing, all the APT groups that are actually doing stuff, in the Malaysian countries or the other areas that we're tracking, the particular actors that we're tracking and looking into and doing a lot of research on their C2, they're almost all leveraging consumer goods IoT through botnets that are being routed, across multiple spans. So this is becoming more of a problem. It's just less in the limelight. And
they don't care about me.
Out there,
it goes back in the day.
They only care about you because you have 2 corporate credit cards in your wallet, but that's it.
Not even that. I have bandwidth. I have computing and bandwidth, right? It goes back to the late 90s where if you stood up a Linux box on the internet, someone would compromise it. Someone would take control of your FTP server and start serving wares.
Or whatever,
internet, right?
Or porn or whatever.
I mean, today it's really just the same thing. Like, they're not after they don't want to control the lights in my workshop. They want to harness my bandwidth and my computing power to attack other things. Tyler, is that what you were kind of getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the real problem with this IoT stuff is it's not so much that there's security, inherent risk, and everybody's vulnerable, because all these consumer goods and IoT are being used already. It's the fact that these consumer goods and IoT devices that are being used inside these botnets are being then used for very, very malicious things that are going after and attacking, say, governments or, larger cybercrime organizations where they're trying to gain bigger picture and bigger detriment to the overall society as a whole. They're using these particular things, and that's where I think we're going to run into issues if we don't continue to try and bring this to limelight, come under trying to get a better harness on what IoT and consumer goods security looks like, because it just provides the attackers more bandwidth, more computing power, more botnets that we then, as security practitioners, have to defend against, right?
Yeah. No, I hear you, Tyler. I mean, we're going to continue to see this. We had some really great sessions on dark web and botnets and in the whole underground infrastructure that's in place. That I mean, you can buy this stuff as a service now. It's not even you have to bring up your own. I mean, you can actually rent this stuff out from the dark web, get an initial foothold through a way, and then they're selling this stuff and selling it off for people to do more advanced attacks. And IoT is one of those potential ways into an organization.
Yep. Yeah, and I think this is going to become a bigger, we'll call it market vertical for security companies and pen test companies that are trying to stay above. Is really you have to have that threat intel piece where you have visibility at the layer and have the data sets and access to the traffic to be able to correlate a lot of these botnets, these attacks, these sell-offs where you're seeing IPs or threat actors or APT groups accessing your corporate environment. Like, how else are you going to detect that if their kit's not within the realm of an enterprise solution that's able to detect it? The only way that we're going to be able to do that is through a lot of the threat intel feeds, a lot of the threat intel happening by good research companies, and getting that visibility and reacting to those particular attacks based on this information. And there's not very many people that have access to that information or are looking into it with the proper background or mindset.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about it, but I don't think they understand the core challenges here. And so they throw it out because it's a good marketing term, Tyler, to talk about
Yep.
IoT and how they do it. But then when you really dig under the covers on what they're doing, you're like, that's not really effective in this space.
No, it's got to become a just like red teaming became the cliche word. Everybody's doing red teaming, and really we're rebranding like some kind of a pen test service or vulnerability assessment. I think threat intel is kind of the next phase of that, and getting companies to really understand what that is, getting marketing to clear the air and really have people differentiate themselves. Where good, there are good companies out there providing good feeds and services around these particular core things that are going to become more of an issue. So I think, again, this is another vertical that is probably the next horizon of really good defense in depth, along with obviously testing and keeping an eye on the stuff that we've already learned the last 10 years.
Can we talk about good hacking in that the Vatican has launched a smart rosary and responded to a brute force attack? Did you see this?
Against
story?
this rosary?
Again, well, I mean, those of us that were brought up Catholic, like myself, right? Like,
And I'm a practicing Catholic. Yeah.
praying the rosary was part of your growing up as Catholic kind of thing. Apparently, there's like an app and device that lets you pray the rosary digitally, but one of the requests weren't validated when you reset your PIN. So a brute force flaw in the app's authentication mechanism lets you log into Google and Facebook. Sure, no problem there. But the alternative caused the issue with the 4-digit PIN. So when the user resets their account using Click to Pray, that's Click to Pray, not
$110 a device.
Yep. It uses an API to make the request to the server, which sends the PIN to the user's email. The server also returns the PIN in its response to the API request, meaning that someone with access to your API could get your PIN.
Could access it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the issue.
We need to
That's
go
really bad.
sit down. We need to go to Italy.
Someone's already done that.
Oh, crap. I'm like, we could fly to Rome, go to the Vatican, and sit down with the Pope.
Alderson, is one step ahead of you. Hacked the Vatican's app, contacted them, and they're fixing the issue together.
Damn.
Which
We missed that trip to
good for you,
Italy.
Elliot. Good for you, the Vatican, working together to fix the issue.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm curious what he was actually like. What drove him to look at this particular app? Was he like swiping left, swiping right on his beads as he was praying? Like,
He wanted to hack the praying, and then I don't know, maybe prevent others from hacking.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
Right?
Lord is with thee. Oh,
Exactly.
next.
hopefully your API is secure. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. We pray your API is secure.
That is a really devout Catholic using the app and
looking
really
for
and going, look,
vulnerability.
wait, there's a vulnerability here.
Mm-hmm.
I would have never have picked that up, but
No, see, that's the ADD hacker. He's sitting there praying, thinking about the API as he's trying to.
Right? Yeah, his mind was wandering elsewhere while he was praying. Right?
yeah, the Holy See didn't have complete visibility into that one.
There's so many puns. So little.
Gotta
time.
love my Catholic faith.
Yep.
I am really curious about this this iPhone passcode, and I'm no lawyer. We have a really great lawyer at Nisos where we're at.
Yeah.
That I'm sure would have all kinds of things to say about this. She's quite vocal about the law.
Oh yeah, the one
Around
where
digital
they
stuff.
forced her to give out her password, right?
Now, put this in context. The article states a woman who was high on meth. And then the article continues. So
comma, dot.
I mean, not that.
Doesn't that fall into
Hold
like
on.
the consensual thing?
Yeah, but rights are rights, regardless of whatever drug that you decided to do. Rights are rights. So let's separate those issues. I think, of course, rights play into violating the law depending on what you're doing while you're under the influence of any kind of substance, which will end this segment with kind of my public service announcement for intoxication, right? Like, shouldn't operate machinery,
Because we'll be highly intoxicated by the end of this episode.
right? But, operating machinery and doing other things while you're under the influence, like, not cool, right? But in any case, a violation of the Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination also protects whether you're high on meth or not. Again, we need to bring in legal counsel on this.
But you got to understand where this came from, right? This isn't Oregon.
Florida?
No, it's Oregon.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not Florida, because Florida probably wouldn't
Have you
done
seen
this.
the memes about anyway?
No, I haven't. So I guess I'm going to look for them in the general channel in a second.
Yes.
But again, when you think about the West Coast for a second, they are
Oregon.
Oregon and California, Washington State.
Thanks for the geography lesson, Matt.
What you're going to see is you're going to see the courts be a little more.
Arizona? Would you include Arizona?
No, or Arizona would not be included
Not
in
be
that
included?
block. No.
New Mexico? Wait, which is
New
furthest
Mexico,
west?
maybe.
It's a state.
New Mexico's furthest west, right?
Right. It's no.
No,
Other way.
further east. Come on. It's Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona,
New
Mexico,
Okay.
Colorado,
Gotcha.
Colorado. Yeah.
Nevada, in between.
But I said,
Idaho up
I
in
said
the corner.
Arizona first, right?
Yeah, but Arizona's not going to. Arizona probably would not have done this, actually,
Interesting.
from a court position.
From a court and political position.
From a
yeah.
court and political position, right? But when you're in Washington, Oregon, California corridor, you're going to see the courts do some interesting things from a privacy perspective.
And
some
quite
other
frankly,
things.
regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, you have to look at that as look at the decisions being made, whether they like common sense or not.
Right.
And a lot of the rights that we feel as security professionals we should have.
Right.
We should have. They're largely
They're being
upholding.
interpreted by courts in very different ways.
It's very interesting. And
It is.
and there's a lot of stuff where you're like, really? Like, there's other things where they can impose taxes or I don't know. I saw all kinds
Yeah,
of,
but I mean,
all kinds of crazy stuff that happens in state laws, but still.
There is a Fifth
yeah.
Amendment right not to self-incriminate, but yet the court says, no, that doesn't apply in this particular case. You have to give them the passcode. Now, if you were to take this up to the Supreme Court, it could be
right?
interesting
Yeah,
whether that would
right.
hold or
up.
not hold.
Right.
Right? Again, but you're going to get very different state interpretations across this, which I thought was interesting.
And I largely leave those really well-educated opinions to those who are actually attorneys.
Oh, in the legal profession.
Because,
yeah.
again, we understand security and all the implications and intricate details that go into that. Attorneys understand the law and all those other factors
Correct.
that play into that.
And
Largely,
you've got local law,
speculation.
state law, and federal law that
Correct.
all comes into this, right? And the Fifth Amendment is
The
more
right to
from
not
a-
incriminate.
Correct,
basically.
and that's more at the federal level. But then
Sure.
you have states making decisions about this, which is interesting. Like I said, if she wanted to appeal, this is something that could go to the Supreme Court, and we've seen
Sure.
aspects
I
of
agree.
this with
Yeah.
Apple.
I agree that it could.
in the old days.
yeah,
It may
yeah.
not, but
Right.
But look, Apple fought this from an aspect of
I remember that.
right.
We covered it on the show.
San
yeah.
Bernardino,
Yes.
and the whole thing
Yeah.
of Apple giving over this information,
Right.
and what was their requirements in that and not in that. Those are court cases that get escalated all the way through. In federal law, will dictate aspects of this. In this particular case, it is here in a state court. Well, it's Oregon. It could be in the Ninth Circuit. I don't know where the different requirements sit here. But it's just an interesting way to interpret it from a legal perspective, let alone from a privacy or security perspective.
Well, and one of the questions that article asked is, could they do like San Bernardino and have Celebrite just crack the phone?
Could potentially. Again, if was she running an iPhone, so I guess it's possible. But remember, Apple made a bunch of changes after San Bernardino and its software. It may not be as easy to crack that any more than it was back in the San Bernardino days.
Really, what's
Right.
what's the benefit? We're talking about someone high on meth. Like, is it?
And crashed a
It's not
car, right? I
necessarily.
mean,
Yeah, it's not necessarily.
She's
a
already
terrorist
being
attack.
charged with potential either state or federal felony and misdemeanor charges at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the?
It's like sounds like a news organization trying to get a different angle on something
Agree,
that's really not a
Tyler.
big deal.
Like, this person obviously needs to be rehabilitated, but like, at what cost to, exercising various facets of the law, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a legal thing. At the end of
And
the day.
protection of other. Obviously, you don't want people under the influence driving or endangering other people either, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, sure.
it's all. I wouldn't want to be a judge, like, because making judges make those decisions, right?
Yeah.
As to how people should be punished and or rehabilitated to whatever extent. So
I got an article from one of our list here that really is hitting a lot of nerves, and I think there's been a few people that have come out and talked about this. The Security Week, so ICS Cybersecurity Conference in Atlanta. There's a bunch of articles that came out and some surveys that said basically ICS security has resulted in injury or loss of life, and there's a whole bunch of things, but no concrete evidence. I think these are the kind of articles that, as security practitioners, we really have to find people in the space, make sure that we understand OT for ICS stuff. The OT side of this is much different than IT, and really get some facts behind it, because this is one of those things I would disagree with. Having worked in OT a lot, I mean, I helped teach the Black Hat ICS class with Justin. The OT and ICS environment and what they're claiming here as far as how these incidents are happening, I severely doubt that this is actually the case, at least at this level. There's enough protections around. Well, OT security is really bad, and it's very, very. It's a different environment.
Yeah, but
it's very
Tyler, there's where I would disagree based on your previous statement, right? Where the air quotes cyber security is really bad as it relates to operational, technology in industrial control systems, but like you said, there's other checks and balances, right? I worked for Digital Bond before I went to Tenable in the ICS space, and we worked very diligently to make sure that the technical controls were in place, knowing that there are, and Matt, you've worked in nuclear power as well, knowing that there are other physical safeguards, like people say, printers can be set on fire remotely. Well, there's actually physical safeguards that prevent that from happening. There's other physical safeguards in industrial control systems that also prevent that from happening. And so, Tyler, I agree that saying that there is a loss of life as a result from this, we need really hard evidence.
Yeah, really hard evidence. I spent 7.5 years in nuclear power. And spent time actually building out the real-time systems to drive the I/O into the control room to manage the plant. And I can tell you back then, there was complete isolation of those systems. And the reason...
Isolation is one...
Yeah, but
sure.
we knew we had a controlled environment. We knew that the data that was
even
going
still,
to the control
but there
room...
was, like we talk about with email phishing in making sure that money doesn't get transferred, Kevin O'Brien gave a great example. There was a $32 million wire transfer that he said the only reason that was held up was because there was a part of the process to actually fax a
PDF file
or something, right? And that was the part that caught. Now, too close for comfort, they adjusted their processes, monitoring, and protections as a result. But in industrial control systems, there's the same thing. There are physical or other controls that prevent, largely I think it's to prevent software failure, because these were developed in times before we considered the threat models for external attackers,
No, I agree.
right? But we benefit from these controls of going, in order to do that, because of not just hackers, right? Because it wasn't in the press like it was now versus 20 years ago, but because of certain conditions, there needs to be a human decision, an extra step in the validation to make sure that you can't change that sensor or that control to cause a nuclear meltdown.
You had as-built, and you had to do things.
Correct.
Right.
I think.
Go
ahead,
Tyler.
No, we really do need to start calling this out. I see this frequently for OT and ICS hitting the news. We got to stop a lot of this FUD around the ICS being so far behind, being so insecure. While they are behind, it is in a different environment. And reading through a lot of these articles, they're saying malware and infections that they can see. Obviously, watering holes, phishing. Most of these OT environments don't have an OS. We're talking about real-time OS. They're not going to be susceptible to the same thing. Yes, the business network, which is how APT and threat groups are going to come through. Business networks are just like any other corporation. They're insecure. Just because it's an OT company doesn't mean if their business network's compromised, that's usually a one-way traffic where they're getting information about the OT stuff. There's safeguards in place. So this loss of life and scaring people around ICS being so bad and Russia's going to shut down the whole power grid and we're all going to go into blackness from the next big malware or ransomware thing. I don't think that's the case, and we really have to kind of differentiate and call that out.
Having been in the space from in my early career, I agree with you, Tyler, in that. Look, I saw one of the biggest brownouts in the entire East Coast, all due to
human error.
In a plant in East Lake, Ohio, which is where I grew up on the east side of Cleveland and spent a good portion of my career. That created a whole brownout. That wasn't malicious and activity.
Yeah, but to play the devil's advocate, don't forget that was pre-Stuxnet.
It was pre-Stuxnet. But a lot of these
as much as we talked about Stuxnet as being very sensational, and we all talked about it.
But it was a very targeted attack, too.
Exactly, sure. But coming out of that, we all kind of realized that, wow, that was a lesson we all need to take some notes on, right? But it was very sensational. But don't lose sight of the fact that that was very much a digital software-based malware that definitely had an effect on real-world systems and industrial control systems.
It did. In like I said, I remember Ron Gula when we were at Tenable, went to a nuclear power plant, and he was trying to figure out what were the potential threats into that power plant. And he got there, and he was he walked out of there because those systems are so isolated, the way they control them, that it was actually hard to get into some of those systems. Now, I'm not saying that you can't. Stuxnet's a good example. We saw NotPetya and others that have had some impacts, but there are safeguards in place to protect some of that infrastructure from causing loss of life, which is, to your point, Tyler, the thing that talks about this article. Look, I took a lot of radiation dose walking into the D-ring and standing on top of the reactor vessel to look at this from a primary controls perspective. I'm not dead yet, right?
Did you not wear a sensor?
I had sensors all the time. Oh, my God. Yes. And I have my reports of how much radiation I took. But
my wife works in medical imaging, and specifically has worked in radiology. And so how do they make sure you don't turn into an alien at some point, right?
You have the sensors on.
You have a sensor that collects radiation.
Every time you walked into the plant, you put on a badge that had a sensor, and it would measure how much radioactivity you had.
Total science, right?
Right.
We know math, how much radiation we can have. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And so...
To me, we would have the same thing for security, right?
There are safeguards in place to protect those plants where they're going to shut down before a loss of life happens. Mm-hmm. I'm just telling you because I've been there, right? I didn't only work nuclear power 7.5 years. I worked at the Alliance Refinery under an SAIC contract when I left the plant and built the disaster recovery plan for the Alliance Refinery down in New Orleans. I mean, there are safeguards in place. There is a lot of procedure and protocol in place to protect those environments.
But I think a lot of good lessons to be learned that apply to security today, potentially.
Well, but there's also on the other side, you remember Fukushima. Fukushima failed, but it was a huge series of cascading failure events. It wasn't a hacker. It took a lot.
Lee, was that
happen.
due to natural disaster in Japan? Is that the
It was a combination of natural disaster,
right?
coupled with
Tsunami?
a couple of human errors on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nearly impossible to replicate.
Yeah, and I mean, Chernobyl was almost the same way, Lee. I mean, if you
Right.
go back and look at Chernobyl and the accident that happened there, I mean, there are safeguards in place where literally you just fill the reactor head with concrete and you seal the environment up. If it got that bad, that's what's going to happen. I'm just telling you, those safeguards are in place. So the ability to have massive loss of life in some of those places are there are protection mechanisms in place, because they would just literally pump concrete in the reactor head and put all that reactive material into concrete. And you know what happens with concrete? Everything slows down, right? And that's the physics of radiation, et cetera. And so, Tyler, to your point is, it's a little inflated when you talk about the loss of life in these environments, because there are a lot of other safety mechanisms in place that really protect the environment, those environments, from a loss of life. Because safety is the top priority in ICS. It always has been. It always will be. In cybersecurity attacks, I don't think have potentially the impact that this article points out.
No, yeah, I mean that's really the point, right? Is we just have to be better as the general public sees these articles and they catch wind on, mass media and productions like that. We really have to be careful and educate people around, well, ICS is, inherently a little bit different and is going to have security issues. Those things, you're not going to see the mass loss of life. It's not as bad as these guys are making it seem. There are APT groups. There are a whole bunch of things and capabilities that nation states do have access to, and a lot of research around that and PLCs. So there are risks through, vendors and all kinds of stuff. It's just like any other environment. It's insecure and does need work still. But we really have to be careful about spreading that FUD, especially around ICS and the general public's understanding and knowledge around that, especially with things like, ransomware, saying that, people have lost life because of ransomware or malware. And it's, in a mainstream article. These are things that this is what causes issues and why it becomes very difficult to get the message across correctly and make sure that people aren't feeling like it's just hopeless.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. Now, so the president, right, did the show The Apprentice where he fired people, right? It's funny. Right.
You're fired.
My family and I were talking about that, right? And talking about, like, when you own a business, the decisions you have to make to fire someone. Now, what we agreed upon was, like, you don't necessarily dislike that person. They're just not the right fit for your organization at that time. Those of us that have worked in this field, we've worked in IT and security, right? We know that maybe we worked with someone who was terminated, we changed jobs and they were there and so much more happier, right? So it's not your dislike for that person or that person's a bad person, right? They're just not the right fit for that organization at that time. The White House now has basically replaced their entire security team for the White House, which you can imagine as a cybersecurity professional working for the White House, there's a certain responsibility to national security that you have for that job.
Agree.
That puts extra pressure on you, maybe.
But
versus
none of
some
them
other
are calling
jobs.
us to help them out. That's what I find amazing.
Well, that's not true, Matt. I mean, some of if they did, we may not be able to talk about it. Sure, right? So there could be those of us that,
but they haven't called me personally.
They haven't called me
so
personally.
I feel
either.
a little miffed,
and
right?
I'd be totally down to help. Certainly,
yeah. Because I think it's in the best interest of the country, right?
Anything related to national security, just putting this out there, you call me, I'm going to answer the phone, and I'm going to help, like whatever it is, right? But again, I don't think it's changing out teams is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a good thing, right? And the media portrays is a very political view.
Yeah.
Put it that way on the world, right, Tyler?
from the enterprise standpoint, so looking at this not just from the White House standpoint, do you agree that, say, like a CISO or someone after a major breach gets fired, or changing over an entire security staff is
I don't
the
agree.
right thing to do?
I don't, Tyler, where I fall in this issue, and I will totally put this out there, and if you disagree, that's totally fine. A CISO and largely their team that experiences a breach, that's a leader in a team that I want to keep rather than get rid of, right?
Absolutely.
Because
That's
they've
not the way.
experienced-
But that's not the way the industry handles it, though.
I agree. But I think that's politics. If it's my company, however small or large, we suffer a breach, to me, that's a team that I keep, because they're just going to go on and take those lessons learned and bring them to some other organization. I'm going to keep that leader and that team, knowing what they've known from that failure, because basically that's the best team in the world to lead my security. Right?
Yeah.
No one is more motivated than someone who has just failed to protect my security in this example.
True.
Yep.
And you look, we see this all the time with breaches and stuff. We see this changeover of staff, and that's why CISOs on average have an 24-month run rate in an organization. They put the burden on the CISO. It's not always the CISO's problem.
No, I agree.
Right? If the CISO's not getting buy-in from the rest of the executive team, they're not getting the resources, they're not getting the budget.
Yep.
How do you blame it on the CISO? It's an easy scapegoat discussion, but at the end of the day, if the organization doesn't set the right priorities, not giving the resources and the budget to help the CISO, how is it the CISO's fault that they got breached?
Largely, though, Matt, we as outsiders don't have enough information to judge whoever's decision it was to keep that CISO or that team, or to fire that CISO or that team, to be honest with you.
So we're assuming that the CISO was qualified.
True.
I mean, back in the early 2000s when I was interviewing for a job, we had a lot of applicants coming in. This and was the post one of the big .com downsizes, and we had people coming in with 3-letter acronyms on their resume, who I don't think knew what the acronym stood for. So I'm hoping we're not. I mean, that sounds like a weird thing, but I've still worked with people that they change jobs every 2 years because they get to the point where they've been discovered they don't know. But if you can get past those to the CISO that really knows their stuff, and the company isn't aligned, if you get a CISO and they can come aligned, you win, you keep them.
Right.
If they can't get the company to come on, the CISO will probably walk.
Right. Well, because how is that CISO going to be successful if he's not getting the budget and the resources he needs to go solve the problem? Right?
Exactly.
And that means that executives have to give him the ability to succeed. And if they don't, then you're going to see the CISO change. But if they do, then you can see those CISOs actually learn from that mistake, make improvements to the organization, and move forward. But sometimes a CISO is sitting as a scapegoat for that when it's really the executive team and the board that really didn't put the emphasis on it in the first place.
But you said it, Matt. Sometimes it's just a scapegoat.
It is.
You didn't say just that, but I'm inferring that from.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be just a scapegoat.
Look, if I'm a CEO, which I am, for a second, and we had a major data breach, who am I going to point to? I'm going to point to you and me, and we're going to figure out, okay, how do we do this better? Because we're not going to fire each other.
Right.
But in a large corporation where
you're going to need
that
a scapegoat.
CISOs come in, you're going to look for a scapegoat. Yeah. And that's unfortunate in our environment, because some of these guys really know what they need to do, and gals, but they don't have the resources to do it. And how do you make them successful to actually do a better job?
Right.
What the CEO level and the board levels need to do is understand, look, I have to enable my security teams to be effective, and if I'm not giving them the resources to do that and I get breached, it's not his fault or her fault. It's your fault and the board's fault for not addressing
this.
What?
Right. Tupac always said, only God can judge, right? And when we look at a lot of these breaches, we don't know as outsiders looking in, was it the CISO's ability or inability to communicate the needs of the security team to the business that was aligned with the business,
Uh-huh.
or was it the higher level coming in going, hey, you know what, it doesn't matter how good or bad you were, like we had a breach and you're to blame, so you're out, right? And
Right.
those I feel like are the two different scenarios that can happen. And as an outsider looking in when we read the news, even if we have inside information, we really don't truly know, right?
Yeah, you know,
I would say, yeah, take the CISO out of it though, and look at the teams. There's not going to be a better team that's battle hardened or has been through a real world situation.
Agreed, Tyler.
That's experience that you cannot buy or replicate, even with engagements, right?
You know,
that's
Tyler,
really hard to
it's funny. I was telling the team earlier, one of my favorite quotes, and I love Winston Churchill. A lot of famous quotes, right? Like, you go. Those that are truly successful go from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And that's really what we're talking about as the teams we want to keep are ones that had a failure, have to recover from it, learn from it, matured from it, and are not deterred by it is Churchill's point, right? They're like, we failed, but so what? We're going to learn from that, and we're going to do better in the future.
Right.
We're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all not perfect, right? But those of us that learn from those failures and move on, those are the leaders we want to keep on our team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you are a good CISO and you really know what it needs to take, what you hope is that from a breach, you get the resources you need to do a better a job.
Right.
We were at Hacker Halted a couple weeks ago, and one of the major breaches came out of that area. I won't talk about the company because we all know who it is. But one of the things they did is they made some changes. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But the CISO that came in really wants to talk about what they did to really address that breach. He wants to be public about it. He wants to talk about it. He wants to communicate to the rest of the community. Look, we made some mistakes. Great. But here's what we're doing to fix those. Those are the kind of leaders you want in your organization to really help the organization move forward in their security programs. And if you have executive buy-in, they can be very successful in doing the right things to really move an organization forward in its security posture, putting the right programs in place, and continuing to drive the business. Those are stories we should tell. Those are stories that I think are great lessons learned from a breach to what happened, to the changes you made, and how you move forward.
From the top down, you need to realize that you're never going to be invulnerable. You're going to be maybe the least vulnerable, or as least vulnerable as you can.
Yeah, right.
Right? And that's what it's all about. And sometimes you have a breach, right? Maybe the win is you realized you had a breach, right? Now, and sometimes they're externally reported.
Yeah.
Which it happens.
It happens.
Right?
Look,
right?
I mean,
but
there's
putting yourself
so
in the position where you're the least breach, and if you are breached, you know about it. And worst case, if it's externally reported, knowing how to restructure the organization, put a plan in place, prioritize and execute to overcome that. Those are the folks you want running security and implementing security in your environment. It's not about, regardless of any of the factors, we had a breach, we're firing the chief security officer. To me, that's not the right answer at all.
No.
I think if everybody would change over to that model of extreme ownership, all the way from the offensive side, and I've spoke about this before, like really as an offensive team, not even being internal, like I take personal responsibility for the clients that we do work for, and I don't ever want to see one of them breached. And if they do, then that's a failure of me to properly help them and get them to the point where I feel, they're accurately and efficiently able to protect against, what we see as the threats. So even from that standpoint, extreme ownership from the top down all the way down to help desk, if you have that ownership of, I'm not going to give this password because I own this area and I'm responsible for it. And
there's some, Tyler, there's some really like weird philosophical kind of thing about extreme ownership that you apply, not just to your career, but to your home life as well. Like whatever bad happens, if I own that as my fault, I'm in a much better position to fix that, right? Like
Yep.
The stress in my house now is my kids aren't going to bed at an early enough bedtime. I can blame my kids, or my wife and I can blame ourselves and be like, you know what, we have to fix this because we're the leaders in our family, right? Same thing in the organization. If we know we're at great risk here, and maybe we've gotten breached, let's say, that the onus falls on us as leaders of the organization to go, yep, I own that problem. I haven't done my job well enough to enable the people that work for my organization to fix the problem. It's a very powerful thing that I think that book certainly, I think, does the best job of underscoring.
Yeah,
there's a
own
key
it as a
point in
team
there
and then
you
own it as an individual as well. Like it becomes important. You're the only person that can control you and the situation. If you own that allows you the power to affect the things that you can affect.
Yep. Lee?
You're also short-circuiting the blame game. You're not playing the I'm blaming this guy in the corner. You're just owning it and moving forward. Let's skip the blame. I mean, we can go do root cause analysis, but this isn't about finding fault. This is about picking ourselves up and just freaking go.
Yeah, and Lee, you really captured what it means to look at an incident and do response. If you can, in your environment, build the culture that removes the blame game, you put yourself so much farther ahead than any other organization. It's amazing. Like when you sit, like when I was working in the university environment, let's not play the blame game. We're all smart people. We all have contributions. Let's take all our contributions and think about what the solution is. Let's do the analysis. Let's come up with a solution and implement it. If we just table the blame game and ignore it entirely, right? You move forward so much faster than any other organization.
And we have seen breaches where the CISO keeps his job and now has the resources he or she needs to actually make the changes in the environment.
Those are the companies that I love. And one of the reasons I come back to Ring, right? They had a vulnerability. They pushed the patch. They were transparent about it. They have a corrective action. They have a solution to it. They experienced a security failure, and they kept moving on. They're like, nah, we're not going to play the blame game. We're like, yeah.
We're going to fix it, and we're going to move on. And now we're going to give
the greatest organization we've talked about on these shows, right, are organizations that are like, yeah, we had an issue. You can tell they didn't play the blame game. We want to fix the issue and move forward. It's like, you know what? You're with the rest of us. No organization is perfect. We all have our various exposures, and we're going to work towards making it better for everyone.
But if you give the CISO the resources they need,
that's true. You're right.
Then you can actually change how the security posture of an organization exists. And look, if you're a major organization, you fire a CISO, right? Think about the onboarding process of bringing a new CISO in just to get them up to speed to be even relevant to your former CISO. Why would you do that? Because now you're just putting yourself that much further back.
But you know what, Matt? You have a valid point. I think that every CISO and or former CISO we've interviewed on Business Security Weekly, formerly Startup Security Weekly, right, has come on and said, they've said, when I start at an organization, I take the first 3 to 6 months to
understand the business,
understand how people work. I don't know who the most recent CISO was that we
Merlin
interviewed.
Namath.
Merlin was like, I take people out to lunch. I'm like, dude, I've been the employee working in the IT security organization. The CISO was like, yeah, I'm going to take you out to lunch, right? And just
learn.
Get to know
and
you.
Understand.
Learn your challenges. Learn your successes. Learn about you, and learn how we can work together. But that takes time. And to Matt's point, when you have to fire and rehire, you're just setting yourself back
3 to 6 months every iteration. And so the CISO now only has a 12 to 18 month window to be successful because it takes 6 months to ramp on a new CISO. That's not the right answer to this problem either.
I agree.
No.
To bring this full circle, that's one of the major concerns that they're stating in this article, and I think it applies to just about any big changeover, is you're losing a good portion of the institutional knowledge, and you're adding into adding into the fact right now that you're doing IT security where there may be IT security failures with inside of politics, where that's blame game is kind of the name of the game, right? That becomes just a recipe for disaster no matter how you look at it.
You know,
It becomes
Tyler,
very difficult to do.
you bring up a great point in institutional knowledge and how critical that is to security, right?
It is.
It's one of the reasons
It's
why
huge.
we're like, we need to push forward our software, right? Well, I got some software development background. I'll just go do it because I have that institutional knowledge. I'm not as talented on the developer side because I've been doing security and other things in my career, but that institutional knowledge lets you push that forward, right?
When
Getting
you lose
rid of
that,
people, yes, losing that institutional knowledge can be more detrimental than hiring other talented employees to come backfill those positions. That's
exactly.
interesting.
Because that business connection and understanding
Yep.
the business and the goals of the business and aligning security to that, when you bring in a new person, that is a window of 3 to 6 months that have to be addressed. You are losing innovation opportunity to drive the business forward, which doesn't really help the business at the end of the day.
But I think when you have a business, you realize that making that person with that institutional knowledge into a leader, which 100% of the time isn't always the case, but if you can transition that person into a leadership role and give them a team, how much more successful can you be? How much faster can you reach your goals?
Because think about what happens
as an organization when you have
So
that.
think about what happens when you fire the CISO. How many people really
Go
liked his
somewhere else.
leash
Yeah.
and they go somewhere
They
else?
follow that
Not
person.
only are
Follow.
you creating a gap in the CISO leadership position, now you have to go rebuild aspects of the team because parts of the team left because they're like, oh, that's it.
And
I'm
we
done.
all know it's no secret, right? The level of happiness at your job, I think the most influential factor, and we've covered tons of studies on this, right, is the person you report to. So when that leader moves to another organization, largely many of us have seen it on this show and people listening, right?
I've done it in my own career.
I've done it in my own career too, right? You follow that leader to their new position. Even
Absolutely.
if the company is something new you have to learn, you're like, I really like working for that person. And even though they might be in a different sector, maybe I'm still doing security, but I like working for that
Right.
person. I'll go learn that new business.
It has impact.
That's just a skill you can learn, right?
Right.
But you can't learn that dynamic between
And that relationship that you have with that leader.
Right.
When that leader
That's-
goes, you get people that leave.
You
and
have
now-
it or you
And it's
don't.
not
Yeah.
only replacing a CISO, it's replacing a CISO and a bunch
The
of your
team.
senior executive staff
Right.
to move the company forward in the middle of a breach and an investigation and all the other things that happen when a breach happens.
I agree.
Yeah,
I think
one of
we've
the-
been
one of
too
the big
hard on the
things-
CISO in terms of a breach perspective. I think is what I gleaned from that conversation. And some of our listeners have sent us feedback like sometimes we come across as being a little too hard on that. But no, we identify with the CISO and the team.
Oh,
in these
absolutely.
situations. Yeah.
And I'm
outside
wondering-
of the CISO,
Go ahead, Tyler.
outside the CISO, one thing that is hard to quantify and often not considered as these big decisions are being made is you're not only losing institutional knowledge, you're losing relationships. You're
Yeah.
losing dynamics that have taken time to forge and build. Well, institutional knowledge takes time to build and can be done by someone else. Often that relational value and the team camaraderie and dynamics that are within an organization often can't be rebuilt. So you have to consider that, but that's really hard to quantify from.
No,
from
it's a great
executive
point,
level.
Tyler. You should look at it as a challenge that your existing team has to learn from and overcome rather than rebuilding. And not to say that sometimes rebuilding isn't the case. Very
Yes,
well could be the
sometimes it could
case.
be.
But
Right.
I think more
It's
often than not,
reestablishing the relationship.
more often than not, it's how does that team continue to work together in their awesome dynamic? Because it's really not their fault. We all have vulnerabilities and exposures, right? And if your team is well equipped to deal with that, that's the team you should stick with, basically.
Right.
It's like rooting for your home team, whether they're 1 in 15, or whether they're 6
2
and
and 4 in my case
2 and 4 in your case.
versus 7 and 0.
We know
It's okay.
7 and 0 doesn't.
My
happen all the
Broncos
time.
jersey's in the other room because I couldn't wear it
Doesn't
on the
happen
show.
all the time, right? But you stick with your home team, I think, is the point, right?
Right. And just imagine if that fired CISO went to go work for your competition.
Right. It's a great point, Lee.
I mean, not a happy transition there. You could wind up with a lot of your secrets, even with NDAs.
Yeah.
You could wind up them making positions and doing things that are going to help your competition kick your ass.
No, and I agree. Having worked in security vendors and worked with multiple people that have transitioned between competing vendors, right? You're not largely, thankfully, as a kind of positive note on the human race, right? Not everyone is evil, right? We know we transition to between competitors and we bring our expertise, but not the secrets, right? And there's a moral and values that stay there. But having our own organization, I don't want to see talents go somewhere else,
Right? True.
Right? It's not good. You want to make it work. I don't know. Realizing that people make mistakes and they're better for it, I think, is the moral of the story. Yeah. To be honest with you. Lee? What else? Other stories do you have?
I had one.
Well,
Matt. Matt or Lee?
I gotta find it.
Lee, go first.
Lee
Then
go
Matt.
first. Then I'll find mine.
So actually, I was thinking about my number 9, which isn't a huge story, but with this talk about the CISO and stuff, Avast was compromised through a reusable VPN credential, and that got domain admin. And my thinking here was not so much that Avast was bad, but they're saying, we must learn a really visible lesson with somebody with a reusable VPN credentials. Maybe somebody could learn with that. I mean, they didn't have to disclose this.
No. Yeah.
But they're helping.
I agree, Lee.
And they, by the way, they've hired a third-party forensic company to make sure they get really good analysis of what happened. Bravo for them. But they're being really open. And the reason it happened was people go after more CC Cleaner users. But I just thought that was really awesome of them to say, hey, this was dumb. Well, they didn't say it's dumb, but you know what I mean. Hey, this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I really truly believe that the companies that are transparent during a breach are the safe bets to either adopt their technology or continue with their technology because they've experienced that failure. And their organization as a whole, in my opinion, doing this 14 or 15 years, right, they're more secure than everyone else, right? Because they've had that. They've earned their stripes, right? They've had their battle wounds from that and can move on. Very similar to what we just talked about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you'll see a lot of. There's always going to be these articles that are going to pick on whatever major vendor, and obviously in security, AV is going to be a target. Firewalls will always be a target. EDR is going to be a target. Like, all of these are going to have chinks in the armor. There's always going to be research around bypassing them. Yes, some are doing better than others, but at the end of the day, these are just companies at various stages of security maturity and product development and life cycles. So really, coming back to the good highlights of what's in our media as security, really making sure that we're paying attention to the things that really matter, people doing a good job and trying to highlight the positive things out of this, because everybody's got skeletons in their closet. Everybody's going to have vulnerabilities. And
but
if you take some time and research them,
you know
it's
what,
going to be a bad day for everybody.
Have you found that because security vendors largely are staffed with security people, that they make up for that in the people aspect more so than the product or infrastructure aspect, right? Because we're a security vendor, we just have more people that can look at the problem and understand security events and respond to them more quickly rather than other companies?
I think that's a lot of it. I also think a lot of that is the marketing behind it, right? Like all of these things are supposedly doing very important key aspects of things that we rely on daily to protect us. For those protections, yes, they're going to get a lot more scrutiny. They're going to get a lot more limelight. And rightfully so, right? If we're relying on a lot of these things, it's not our prayer app where we're swiping left or right on a bead, right? It's protecting us from the next ransomware attack that's going to crypto lock all of our cat pictures. Yeah, I think the scrutiny is deserved.
No, not cats. I got plenty of those. I got a couple in my messenger from my wife, who's watching on live, going, "Shut up."
Not your wife with cats that she shot, like big cats, right? 'Cause she's pretty good with the gun. So we're talking about like felines.
Yeah, felines.
Feline. Yes.
You got to distinguish this. There's two Idaho people on the phone here.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's cat season.
Clarity is
Well,
important.
we get mountain lions in Colorado too. I mean,
Oh, that's right.
yeah.
Mountain
Depends on how
lions.
high up you are.
Interesting.
What's that?
Mountain lions, huh?
Mountain lions. Bobcats are they're eating rabbits and stuff. It's the mountain lions that are dangerous because they're stalking, looking for humans. They're big. Bobcats,
Right.
not that big a
Wait,
deal.
what's the one that screeches with claws? It's not a bobcat. It's not a mountain lion.
I don't know.
This is trivia. Fisher cat, thank you. We have Fisher cats.
The bobcats. Look,
I don't
they're
know what that
going
is.
after the little prey. The mountain lions are
Right.
going after the big prey.
Blah,
and that
blah,
would
blah.
be humans.
If you haven't come face to face with a Fisher cat, don't talk to me.
oh, okay.
And regulations that prevent you.
How about a mama bear and 2 cubs? That's a dangerous situation.
I agree that's a
Okay?
dangerous situation. However, Fisher cats, regardless of cubs or whatever, are just vicious when you come across them. And very prominent in New England and in a highly populated area where you can't discharge a firearm. How do you deal with that threat? It's an interesting security kind of analogy, right? Like, how do you...
No. Archery.
Air rifle with silencer.
Crossbow.
That way-
Crossbows. I've threat modeled this lead,
Yeah.
right? Like, do you use a crossbow? Do you use a BB gun?
No, you
Do
use
you,
crossbows.
like,
Silent and deadly.
Flamethrower. I've also
No.
considered. Like, I've seriously
You char the
legit
thing,
threat
it's on
modeled
fire
this. Like,
running.
yeah.
It's
blow
running
darts.
across the air. No.
Johnny says blow darts. Right, Mark? Blow darts.
Ransomware cat pictures to screeching felines and flamethrowers.
Archery
Yeah.
is silent. It's
It
why
is. No,
that's why crossbow is
crossbow.
my weapon of choice. If I were a
Right.
serial killer, very silent, very hard to track. No
Illegal.
No gun
in,
smoke.
in New England. Largely illegal to hunt with in New England. In
What
the
is?
flyover states where you live in, there's a lot of land.
There's a lot of
and a lot more animals to hunt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
elk
Crossbows
and deer
totally
and all kinds
cool.
of stuff.
Yeah.
But it takes a good shot, though. I'm telling you, I've had friends that go out and do archery hunting of deer and elk. And
No, I agree.
you got to drop those
it
things
is-
because if you don't, they run for miles. They run miles downhill, and then you
Hunting-
got to haul that
No,
carcass
I
uphill.
agree. Yeah.
I'm just telling you that's a lot of work.
the skill involved in taking an animal down with archery with a regular bow is
compound.
Oh,
typically,
is
It's
amazing.
a
We,
lot.
we've got a mutual friend who does that,
Who is that, Lee?
Mr. Poor.
I was gonna say Mike Poor.
Mikey's a compound bow hunter.
Mike is like
I
the
think
most,
he and Larry went
but
out
Mike is the
bow
most
hunting.
interesting man in the world. Like he's like, I'm going bow hunting, and then I'm going to the bar. I'm gonna pound like 16 whiskeys, and I'm gonna go home and make a knife, and kill a bear in my
Those on
backyard.
sand.
Like that's Mike.
When my
That's
kids
it.
were shooting archery in 4-H, my daughter's like, "Dad, you should take me hunting." And I'm like, "Honey, do you know what hunting means? It means we go out like before the crack of dawn.
No, it's
Okay, like 4
respect,
a.m. in the
yeah.
morning. You hike up a tree, you sit in a tree, and then you stand there all day waiting for a
in the
deer or an elk in the
mind
cold,
you, in the cold.
waiting for a deer or elk to come across your path, and then
Right.
you have to have the skills to when you shoot it that you literally drop it. I mean, your targeting has to be well, because if you don't,
Has to go through the chest into the
right
lung,
through the chest, right,
Yeah,
through,
there's
right.
a very small.
and if you don't, that
You
thing
have to track
runs,
it, yes.
and they run for miles, and they like to go downhill in Colorado mountains.
a lot downhill.
Holy cow,
yeah.
it's a lot of downhill. Okay, so these things run, and then you got to go track it. You got to go find it, and then you got to gut it and clean it and quarter it and pull it out. I'm like,
Yeah.
are you sure you really want to do that? And so we had some really good friends. Their son was younger than my oldest daughter, a little older than my youngest son. Went out and they do a lot of hunting. and he was out doing his first deer hunt, shot a deer, missed, had to track it. And in the story of them bringing that thing back out, I'm like, this is what you want to do? End of discussion. We never had that discussion again.
It's not for every, but it's awesome. Like, much respect to people that do it, for sure.
Yeah, my neighbor as a kid used to do it. And I remember him bringing home the white-tailed deers out of Ohio and hanging them in his garage, and we skin them and all that stuff. But in Colorado, that was pretty flat, right? In Colorado,
There's a lot of mountains,
Idaho, again, you got a lot of hills. That's a very difficult thing to do that.
Well, my old neighbor used to go out in the hills in California with his daughter, who was a crack shot. And they had a lot of daddy-daughter bonding hunting, and they did very well. But there was two of them. The first one didn't get it. The second one dropped it. So there was none of this chasing from here to there. So they had each other's back. But you're right. If you don't get it, you got to go. You don't want to let it run off and die. You've got to go get it.
That means daddy has to have as good a shot as the kids. And I was never that. I mean, I can shoot pretty accurately, but still, when you're in the pressure of standing in a tree stand and trying to shoot a moving animal, I'm telling you, it's not easy.
But it's interesting. It goes
I never
back
said
to
it was easy.
But it goes back to all of our conversations about working under pressure, right? Having the knowledge and skills to know what to do, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And also very telling about those that can see a vulnerability, identify an exploit, write an exploit, and follow it through the entire way.
Keeping
a lot
their
of parallels
cool.
there.
Yeah, keeping their cool.
And keeping their cool, to go back to our conversation with Tom, for sure.
Yeah.
So curious, Lee, on your number 10, this one actually has some relevant interest, and I think this, from a higher level perspective, we've seen this a lot already, right? Like AWS cloud, from a offensive security, or even just a security and having to defend against all this cloud integration, federation, and stuff. Like, these are prime examples of why this is becoming a much bigger deal, and something that every organization is going to have to deal with sooner or later. So getting really trained up on the cloud side of this, and from an offensive side, really understanding what your risks, your risk profile, what your company's roadmap and strategic design is for the cloud, and having stuff ahead of that where the security can be kind of identified and architected from the beginning. I think is a prime example of why.
Absolutely. And this one, that was not just one organization. It was like these multiple companies were using the same back end. So it wasn't just a little bit of data. It was 179 gigs of data that was exposed. That's a
lot of data.
Well,
that's a big
Elasticsearch. The thing about this cloud is all the shared stuff.
Yep.
You know, you think it's shared services, the ubiquitous access, but doggone it, you got to engineer into security, like you just said, or game over.
I think this comes back to, we've been down this circle again. So I think we're circling back around, right? Like back in the AS400 days or database days, like everything was getting centralized. All the data was coming centralized in-house, and then you were outsourcing that, and then you were bringing it to a host, and now you're virtualizing it. And now it's coming back to bare metal, and now we're going to cloud. Like this whole security cycle around where the data lives and, you know, what it lives on and what it's, you know, ultimately we really have to understand it's data. We have to secure it and architect it and design it from the ground up, no matter where it's going. We're going to have these continual cycles, and really getting ahead of that and understanding what the risk is, no matter where your data's at, should be the bottom line.
It is the triad I always talk about: applications, users, and data. Data is still the nirvana in what we have to protect, but how we give applications and users access to that data is an important criteria. But you're right. Data at the end of the day is the nirvana. We're not there from a data protection perspective. I wish we were, because if we did, then who gave a crap about all the other stuff that we've done? Because if we can protect the data, we're good. But when we talk about cloud, when we talk about distributed systems, when we talk about all these things, it is really user access both to the application and to the data, and the application's access to the data, that are really the three triads that we really have to spend more time on. We had a great conversation, like I said earlier, with Qualys that will air next week on We're abstracting away network. We're abstracting away endpoint. Think about how many solutions we have at the network and the endpoint layer that may or may not have relevancy in the new world as we continue to move forward. But when you look at the spend around app user data compared to endpoint network, are we spending the right money in the right places? I think it's a huge question for people to answer.
Matt, I totally agree. And then I'm brought back to reality when I read the news. And there are lapses in security because marijuana was found at a missile launch site. But more importantly...
That's physical security. Oh, sorry.
More importantly, with respect to physical security, it says in this article... Other lapses include theft of a launch code device as missile crew members were sleeping on the job and failed inspections, which tells me, like, drugs found independent, right? But basically,
that's the tip of the iceberg.
People fell asleep on the job. Like, not even literally, people fell asleep on the job, which led to missile launch codes, which comes on the heels of the story about I think it's the Navy, coming out and saying basically we're ditching 8-inch floppies for Air Force, right? Ditching 8-inch floppies in favor of more modern technologies.
I didn't even know 8-inch floppies existed. I'm used to 5 1/4 and 3.5. I never played with an 8-inch floppy.
What was
These are IBM System 1s that have been running since 1976, and their drives are now hard, not floppy.
I'm glad the drives are hard and not floppy because I've never played with an 8-inch floppy.
How long do you have to play with an 8-inch floppy? But never mind.
Before it becomes hard.
The killer on those systems is in order to fix them, they had to they couldn't go buy boards anymore. They're buying like ICs and resistors and soldering new parts onto the boards to keep them running.
Oh, back to my fields engineering days back in college.
And this comes on the heels of another article that was making the news rounds this week that says THC breathalyzers are becoming a thing, right? But it underscores the point, first of all, in security community, those getting into the community, right? Intoxication is intoxication, whether it's alcohol, THC, whatever. You're under the influence of some substance, right? And there's also substance abuse. Just to put the PSA out there, right? Operating a motor vehicle under the influence of some substance is bad. I think, kind of hacker thing is, well, they don't have a way to test.
Right.
You've lived in Colorado,
I lived in Colorado.
This is an issue in your state.
We were the first state to...
No, California was...
No, we were the first to legalize marijuana.
California was medical before... recreationally
we recreational, right?
And then California was recreational legal after
us.
Oh.
After us.
So you were the pioneers in this.
Yeah, it was.
Space.
And one of the challenges that we had in the state was, how do you measure for this? How do you measure whether somebody's under the influence or not on the influence with THC, right?
Again, I don't have a problem with it, but again, if you're if there's risk to bring into a security thing, right, involved, you shouldn't be operating a motor vehicle. Like, do it, and you're in a home.
I mean, cool, here's how crazy it is.
Same thing with alcohol. Like, yeah, cool.
Here's how crazy it is in Colorado. Lauren and I are driving home. We went up to see Renee up in Fort Collins. And that's a good 2-hour trek north for us. We had breakfast with her. We're driving home, and we're driving by this car, and I kid you not, they're smoking a bong in the car.
Like we're smoke billowing out of the car.
We are driving down I-25 south home, and I pass a car that is literally the car next to me. They're smoking a bong in the car. How do you test for that? How do you address that? That is an issue that no one's been able to solve easily.
And this is one of those legalized it, right? Have had an issue with how do you test for it?
How do you test for it? Because it's in your bloodstream for a while. How do you know whether you did it now versus you did it 10 days ago, right? This has been a challenge in all the states that have
But we had to know as being in
legalized marijuana.
technology that technology would catch up.
Eventually, yeah, it would have to pick up, right?
And but the PSA is like, don't do that. Like, that's just stupid.
Yeah, but when somebody's smoking a bong in the car next to you,
That's really stupid.
you pretty much know that's stupid, and that's not a safe driver. But how do you catch that?
Right.
Because they throw the bong in the back. That's from a month ago, right? And how do you know whether they're high or not high? That is a challenge for law enforcement all around the country that has legalized this stuff. It is interesting.
And even field sobriety tests aside, right? If you've seen, what was this show on Discovery Channel that tested it? There was a show. What was that show called with Adam Savage and stuff? Anyway.
I don't keep up on modern TV.
But several TV shows have said, look, if you're drunk or you're high, let's have you run the driver test sober, right?
Walk the line and do all that.
No, not even walk. You're driving a vehicle, right, in a controlled environment, right? And whether it's alcohol or marijuana, we're having you doing it sober, right? Going between the cones, making corners, the whole thing. Okay, now you're going to have one beer. Now you're going to take one hit of your bong, in your example, right? Now how do you fare, right? And progressively going towards that. And if you watch the episodes, and again, it's like pseudoscience, right? The alcohol, I think, more quickly gets you to the point of knocking over cones, right? But with marijuana, it also very, down that path, allows you to not be as safe when you're driving, right? And so, but how do you test for that? It's the same thing in our industry. How do you test for how secure you are, right? It's kind of an arbitrary thing, like how secure am I? How safe am I to drive? It comes down to how accurately can you test for that? It ties into compliance. It ties into security. How accurately can I test for what's my acceptable risk level? Again, which is what they have to define for marijuana. For alcohol, states have adopted various laws. The blood alcohol level, when you're safe to drive versus not safe to drive, has largely been left up to the states, right? It's going to be the same thing for marijuana.
Yep.
How safe of a level and how accurately can we test for that level are all factors that play into that.
In Jeff Mann's absence, I would say PCI for marijuana.
Yeah, Tyler, I think you're
That
on
is twice this week we've had to inflect Jeff.
right? It's a great point, though. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
What is the safe and acceptable level of compliance?
And there are
essentially,
certain states on the cusp of this because they've been dealing with it for a while. In Colorado, we've been dealing with this for a while. Now all the other states, Massachusetts, California, and others that have passed it,
Washington.
now all have to figure out how do you test for legal intoxication at the time a driver is driving with THC in the system.
Right.
And that has not ever been an easy measurement. And hopefully what we see is good technology here to do that.
Field which I don't know if it transfers into security, right? But field sobriety test, does that not help in determining if the person, Tyler?
Isn't that field sobriety test? Isn't that penetration testing at its
No,
finest?
it's a great point. No, it's a great point, Tyler. No, it is. Yep, absolutely.
I'd probably pass the test to a certain level with alcohol. I have no idea what I would do on the other stuff. So
we should do an episode where we test that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, you.
How well can we secure an environment when we're under the influence?
I take a drink, you take a hit, and we go. Right, and it's like side by side. Oh, that could be fun.
That could be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right. And on that note,
Everyone's telling us to wrap up. I guess we gotta. Do we have to wrap up?
Oh, is that what's in the general?
You know what? We're done.
The team says,
hey,
cut it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to this edition of Paul Security Weekly. We'll see you next time. Over and out.
out.
Qualys is introducing a new prescription for security, and it's free. Global IT asset discovery and inventory. Activate it today at securityweekly.com/Qualys so you can achieve 100% near real-time visibility across your hybrid environments. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is unprotected attack paths that allow threats to compromise vulnerable targets in the cloud and data center. But traditional microsegmentation is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable and management that's zero touch. Driven by machine learning, Edgewise automatically builds policies that protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network. They provide measurable improvement by quantifying attack path risk reduction and verifying software identity before it communicates to stop application compromises and data breaches. To see how to eliminate your network attack surface, visit securityweekly.com/Edgewise.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. You may notice I'm wearing a different shirt because this was pre-recorded. We have a time machine, essentially, or not. A quick announcement before we get started. The new Security Weekly website is live. Mr. Matt Alderman's here with me, who led that project to build a new website and basically based on, I like what we were saying earlier, based on listener feedback, allowing our listeners to find content more easily. I mean, heck, we had trouble finding our own content.
I had trouble breaking it apart and figuring out how to recategorize everything. So, yeah, we had fun doing that project.
Absolutely. SecurityWeekly.com has a whole new look that lets you discover our content, find our content more easily. If you find issues with our website, security or not, any feedback you have on our website, especially if you find a security vulnerability, website at securityweekly.net is the address to send it to. Our interview for this segment is Mark Dufresne. Mark's responsible for Elastic Endpoint Security's efforts to understand cybersecurity threats and develop innovative capabilities to detect and prevent malicious adversary techniques. Mark, of course, has over 12 years of experience in offense and defensive cybersecurity. Mark, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Mark, obviously, our listeners heard that introduction and are like, wait, Elastic Security. Didn't Mark used to work for Endgame, right? Formerly Endgame, now Elastic Security. And I guess that's a good place to start in this interview and telling our listeners, obviously, there was an acquisition. There was a lot of transitioning and I'm sure a lot of meetings that took place to come to this point where you're ready to announce to the world, what it looks like today at now Elastic Security.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, big news from Endgame and now Elastic. The merger, the joining of forces between Elastic and Endgame closed on October 8th. So now we're one big happy family. And it was great last week to be able to finally talk to users and talk to the market about what it is that we're doing, and with Endgame rolling into a new Elastic product called Elastic Endpoint Security.
Yeah, so I think some of our listeners may know Elastic. A lot of people use Elastic under the covers as part of. A lot
of people use Elastic and don't know they're using Elastic.
Yeah, that's true.
And then a lot of people who are brave will do their own Elastic instances, which is always, I've never done one, but it sounds really interesting and very cool. And some people have done some really awesome things, right, with the open source version of Elastic, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Security professionals, Elastic has kind of become the de facto tool of choice that people have been using to store all of their security relevant data for a really long time. And in fact, that led to Elastic doing things like creating the Elastic Common Schema. I think anybody who's ever created a data lake understands how hard it is sometimes to get your data from your different data sources all into like a unified queryable format. And so opening with that, Elastic in the last year has released an open SIM. So, you spin up an Elastic Stack, click a button, and all of a sudden you have a free and open SIM technology, which has allowed some of their users to throw out some of the, expensive, sort of difficult to use SIM solutions that they have already. So You're thinking about endpoint. That's just a continuation of that journey. It's a new product now available to existing Elastic customers and new customers, tying together the world's really first free and open SIEM with the best endpoint protection technology, all in a cohesive package.
Now, I can imagine our listeners, like, next thought is there like a free and open version of the Elastic endpoint security? I'm sure it's still a trial. Is that correct?
Not at the outset, and we'll see what the future holds on that front. Right now, existing Elastic customers, the bigger customers, can get this thing, and we'll kind of see where that goes from there with the former Endgame product and now Elastic Endpoint Security product.
So when we think about Elastic and what it's done in the OpenSIM product, now we bring in endpoint data from formerly known as Endgame. We start to cover a couple of your quadrants in your enchanted quadrants of IOC. How is that coming together? Can you kind of describe to our listeners what's happening with the endpoint and the SIM products coming together?
Yeah, well, in SIM, as you guys know, it's been traditionally kind of a passive experience, suck up a lot of data, maybe get some alerting out of that, and but you can't really do anything. You have to manually go do something on your endpoints or orchestrate, and the endpoint is really where you need to be to do the best type of remediation for your risk. And so you can imagine, not all of the excellent data you can get from the endpoint aside and having that be a first-class citizen in a SIM app, but the coherent experience all the way through a response. Even if the alert comes from another data source, but you have the endpoint installed perhaps on that you can go respond on, just being able to do that full coherent loop of capabilities, getting rid of some of those seams between technologies and do it, most importantly, perhaps like fast and effectively on the endpoint. We just think it opens up a lot of interesting opportunities for users of what has previously been a really, really kind of passive and it's kind of a, well, now what do I do type of technology and all kinds of other problems you have to solve, and being able to expand into solving other problems and other use cases.
Mark, that's interesting, and I'm not sure where the market stands today on that bi-directional communication between your endpoint security technologies and your security intelligence, right? Wherever else you're gathering that from, whether it be domains, whether it be the network, whether it be threat intelligence. That is, if I discover on the endpoint, or the endpoint client discovers there's malware and says, hey, it's talking to this domain, and feeds that up. But then there's also the other way where something may identify a network connection or a domain and push that back down to the endpoint and say kind of like, watch out for that, or do you have anything communicating with that? Is that the goal, or is that already achieved that goal of that bidirectional communication?
I think some of those bidirectional capabilities like that and many more we could come up with to orchestrate capabilities and do prevention. That's I think that's what the future kind of holds here. Our users, Elastic users, folks building their own data lakes, everybody's kind of sick of having all these different point solutions that don't talk to each other. And so bringing together an endpoint capability, a SIM, and everything we can do on top of that with some of these response type use cases, I think that's that's kind of the vision we want to charge forward with here. And this marriage of these two technologies gives us an amazing opportunity to do so.
Yeah, if you think about it from a SOC analyst perspective, right? They see an alert come across the SIM. Now they have to pivot. Yep. Right, and they have to pivot to the endpoint, and those pivots aren't always easy, right, because of this lack of bidirectional integration. I assume here, Mark, what we're going to see is the ability for the SOC analyst to pivot into that endpoint data and do things at the endpoint more seamlessly, I guess, is that, if that's the right way to say it, to make it easier for the SOC analyst to do their job.
Yep. Yeah. And again, Elastic customers have been doing threat hunting for a long time. It's a really common use case in the stack. It's probably the best place to do your threat hunting operations. But yeah, with the traditional SIM type deployment, you still again have to go orchestrate some crazy PowerShell remoting, or jump into another tool, or do something on that endpoint that you think you found an issue to gather more data. So being able to seamlessly collect more data, do your investigation, take those response actions, and then with going all the way to what our technology lets you do, like take some of the concepts of threat hunting. And I think we've talked before about the idea of reflex preventions inside the endgame endpoint, which will be coming, of course, with the Elastic Endpoint product, where you can take a behavioral rule that your threat hunters might implement to say, hey, I think I saw an anomaly with a PowerShell process spawning this other thing, and there was network activity associated with that to this class C or something like that. be able to express that behavior succinctly using the event query language, push that all the way down to an endpoint, and all of a sudden you're really seamlessly orchestrating like preventative actions all across your endpoint, because you can tell the Elastic endpoint to say, hey, if you see this again, just block it in line and send me an alert. Tell me it happened, but block it. Don't let it happen. So being able to tell those whole stories and really do a lot more with your threat hunting operations, remediate and turn things into prevention is the type of power we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, so Mark, earlier you talked about, when you have a data lake and you're using Elastic, that it gives you that common format to query. When it was Endgame, you had developed EQL. Are those going to come together or integrate, or what's going to happen with that?
Yeah, the specifics of that they'll kind of unfold over the coming months. But one of the most exciting things about this, and Shai, the founder of Elastic, has talked about the power of EQL and what that can bring to security use cases. So, you'll see EQL showing up in other places in the stack, driving certain types of operations and continue to be used to power both detection and prevention on the endpoint.
So the good thing about this acquisition,
it stays around, because we did a segment on the EQL, and I really like the concept and the execution.
The good part about that is, because Endgame was acquired by Elastic, they don't have to change the name of EQL.
That's right. There you go. Keep the same name.
We actually, and people do think it's the Endgame query language. It's really, it's actually called the event query language. We did it very deliberately because we want a community adoption. And I guess that might be a good time to just point out that it's, the Endgame research team that I used to run, and now running the protections organization at Elastic, the entire Endgame R&D team came along for this ride. We're all bought in, all invested. And one of the things that we're all really excited about is not just scaling up massively the impact we can have on solving security problems and stopping malware and bad actors and enabling threat hunters. We're excited that Elastic's the whole ethos is all about openness and sharing of technology. So EQL is just one example of technology we've shared to try to raise all boats. I mean, we've seen Elastic not just forget the core components of the stack, but things like the Elastic Common Schema, which I think is the best language out there as a common way to describe different types of data and enable interoperability. We'll be able to. You'll see us out there, really, kind of continuing to push the envelope and sharing a lot of information about, how to do threat hunting, specific queries that we find useful. They'll work great in our product, but they're also going to be things we want to put out to the community to just kind of raise all boats, no matter what your technology of choice is. It's you'll see us out there with EQL and other technologies as well, sharing code, talking at conferences, writing blog posts. All that's going to continue and probably accelerate.
What I like about this acquisition is you and I used to have this conversation when we were at Tenable, right? We knew eventually the combination of the endpoint and the SIM and bringing all that data together in a consolidated platform was where the market should go. And we talked about this 3-4 years ago, and we were driving a lot of the research and strategy work we were doing at Tenable. It's good to see this actually start to happen, because I think the one thing, Mark, that customers just struggle with is all these different point solutions, that lack of bidirectional integration. Now what you get through this integration is that starting to consolidate this data together in a way that makes it really easy for security teams to leverage all the power from the endpoint, from the other log data, and just move forward. And I think that's a great thing to see in the industry actually happen.
Yeah, it's definitely a great alignment between the two companies. And the thing that I took from what you just said earlier, Mark, was that the research and development team stayed. And that was one reason why we loved working with Endgame and now Elastic, right? Is the research team. I mean, when you folks come on the show, it's fantastic. The scope and breadth and depth of knowledge is just amazing, and it sounds like that'll just continue, right?
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, and it's not just my old team; it's our engineering team, all of our software developers, it's our go-to-market aspects, sales, marketing. I mean, all the expertise at Endgame. The vast majority of it is carrying through and providing, much of the base of the Elastic team and joining forces with their excellent folks on their SIM team who have an incredible amount of experience in fusing those skill sets. It's already it's already really exciting for all of us that are part of the transition.
Have there been a lot of conversations around the data analytics that are shared between the two platforms, one on the endpoint and one on the SIM side? I'm sure that you guys have had a lot, and gals have had a lot of great conversations about,
absolutely.
coming together.
Yeah, one thing that's really exciting is it's great we'll be able to tell kind of a cohesive story through all the products. I mean, the Endgame platform provided high confidence analytics we could push all the way down to our endpoints, create preventions for. Some maybe less highly confident analytics that you could just get alerting detections on. Some other things in our platform we called enrichments that wouldn't create alerts, but if other alerts happen, it would be things we would surface to the user, like, hey, look, this process tree, it happened to set a registry run key. You might want to know about that for remediation purposes. So you don't want to alert on that every time, but you want to know about it. So now we also have the SIM technology, which we can place analytics there, which can take advantage of some inherent things that Elastic and Kibana are really good at, like doing outlier analysis, different visualizations of your data, writing some kind of broader queries, and doing filtering and aggregation to do that threat hunting operation with some certain base KQL and EQL queries. There's also some really awesome capabilities in the SIM, like machine learning anomaly detection that just exists natively, that just simply learn on your own data. So being able to, we're definitely in the process of weaving together like a cohesive detection story that ties together really high confidence stuff for prevention, some contextual stuff, and then what really makes sense to enable threat hunting just out of the box and be able to tie, put a nice bow on all of that and offer a coherent experience to our users. That's really, for me, one of the more exciting things about this entire acquisition is the opportunity to kind of tell the second side of that story we were trying to tell just on the endpoint with the SIM technology and with the power of Kibana.
And it sounds like you're reducing that dwell time, making it easier for the defenders to reduce that dwell time, because the data from the SIM and other sources is more tightly integrated now into the endpoint, correct?
Yeah, no doubt. And that's what we're all about, is reducing that dwell time. And with Elastic, it's also all about, we know that no matter how hard we try, or, there could be just a compromised account that someone has to go back and do a 9-month retrospective on, oh my gosh, what the heck did this account do?
Yeah.
You need that data, and the integration with Elastic lets us lets our users not have to worry about how they're going to store that data, keeping it around. They just have the power of Elastic and Elasticsearch in their back pocket, where they can just scale as much as they want, and they can keep as much data as they want, and be able to search through whatever data they want for a very long period of time to get that type of look back that we know they need to solve their search type of use cases that inevitably are going to come up in every organization.
Right. That kind of ties into the second part of the announcement from last week, which is the end of endpoint pricing. Can you give us, it looks like you're moving away from per endpoint pricing, kind of update us on what that portion of the announcement looks like? Because I think again, for our listeners, what does that mean, right? You're getting rid of per endpoint pricing.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and we're really excited about it because it's different than what buyers of Endgame and similar technologies are used to, which is per endpoint pricing. We're moving to a resource-based pricing model, which is exactly what Elastic does across all of their capabilities. Which again, it's use as little or much as you need, get the maximum value from your data. And that's what you buy. So you don't have to go through this nonsense, and it's becoming more nonsensical every day in this world of how many VMs am I running at any one moment? How many containers do I have to have introspection into? How the heck do you count any of those things and budget for that? So we're kind of throw that away. You don't have to worry about this counting of endpoints exercise, and instead it's just about the data that you produce and you want to pay. We make it it becomes pretty simple, very predictable, and very easy to configure. So, I mean, if you can have a handful of systems over here where they might be kind of ephemeral, not that big a deal, low risk assets. Maybe you want to keep their data for 14 days. Okay, great, go do that. You got your CEO's box. Maybe you want to keep that data basically in perpetuity, and with easy to set that up, easy to configure that, and again, you pay for what you use through Elastic's really well adopted and well understood resource pricing model.
Yeah, immutability has created some really interesting challenges for, how many assets do I really have at any given time, right? Because you can ramp up a bunch of assets for peak load, for example, and every organization that's been on an endpoint pricing kind of model, and there's a bunch of them out there, have always struggled with this concept of what do I do with immutable infrastructure when things are spinning up, spinning down? How do you count it, don't count it? By eliminating that's a game changer, right? Is put it everywhere. Bring the data in, figure out how long you want to keep that data. It really changes the game, I think, in the new technology stacks to make it a lot easier to just deploy as much as you want. Then it's all about managing the data, how long that data hangs around. Makes it a lot easier for organizations to get a much fuller, comprehensive deployment of these solutions out there and not have to worry about, well, do I have enough endpoint licenses to do this?
Yeah, like realizing, 30 days into your deployment that you need to go get 50% more endpoints, and all of a sudden you've blown way past your budget. It's a huge problem, and it is very easy to spin all of this up. It's Elastic Cloud is incredibly easy to use, and it's incredibly easy to connect it to your Elastic Endpoint Security. Basically, just do a couple things in the console, and all of a sudden your data is flowing, and you're off and running. We've already Endgame for a long time, and I think we've been on here before talking about this. But it's not just about all the whiz-bang capabilities I've come on and told you about in terms of our preventative actions, but just making it simple, and that's where Elastic is going as well with their SIEM and with security in general. And so we're keeping those facets of the joint offering in mind as well. Again, it's just another thing. It's a great marriage of two companies, two cultures, two sets of values. Simplicity, openness, all these things are coming together in this product.
Yeah, and I think as security professionals, simplicity is a big part of it, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's so complex to roll this stuff out and set it up and manage it and integrate it. If you can make it simple, then you can extend your protection capabilities beyond even what you don't even know about in some respects.
Well, and that's where Mark, I love when you come on the show because we get to have this discussion, right? Because since the last time you've been on the show, we've interviewed a few people, and I've spoken with a lot of people that do adversary simulation. And I think this is an advancement in penetration testing that's very valuable for enterprises today. And what some of the things I've gleaned from these conversations are largely the adversary simulation teams that get permission to basically dwell within an environment for 6 months are developing their own tools. They're creating their own infrastructure, their own tools, because if anything's been out there, even in a GitHub repository or a blog post, right, the endpoint vendors are doing a really good job of swallowing that stuff up, right? So they're like, I have to create my own tools. So where are we in this kind of cat and mouse game?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's funny. The amount of red teaming research that folks are publishing is, it's going up. And I pay attention to it, and we make sure that our capabilities can cover it because a lot of the techniques that we see blogged about, they do get picked up by actual adversaries. So you do have to detect and prevent against it. But it's one thing to, pick off the invoke Mimikatz PowerShell commandlet and just signature that, which is what you see a lot of products doing. And so with some very simple obfuscation, red teams can bypass a lot of products, but just with some really simple stuff, because the way people try to do detection is really, really lame. It's a lot of signatures. We've been on here before talking about how we don't do that. We focus on making sure we can see the underlying behaviors that these tools are actually implementing in order to gain, to escalate privileges, to move around the network, to persist, to do whatever it is that they're doing, and then finding what's in there that's novel, what we don't have coverage for right now, and then we deploy a capability to provide protection for that behavior. So that cat and mouse game, it is not ending. It's going to be here for a while, and it's just something that we deal with every day on my team.
Yeah, there's slight variances in the way normal users and applications will behave. And it seems to me adversaries are very much trying to emulate that, but there's those subtle differences you have to detect. Can you talk about how maybe the Elastic, integrating the SIM into there maybe helps you better detect some of those differences, right? Because I've often found you've got to include other sources of data to put that whole picture together.
Yeah, and that's actually that's a great way to, which we had trouble at Endgame implementing actually in the product. We did it in our research side, doing some anomaly detection and trying to find outliers and things, and then expressing, finding something to go look at, expressing a behavior in EQL and pushing out a behavioral rule. We didn't have a way to do streaming behavioral anomaly detection in the Endgame endpoint, and that's a really exciting and core capability of the Elastic SIEM is actually the Elastic machine learning anomaly detection capability, which is baked in as a first-class citizen inside the SIEM. It's really quite cool. You can just point it at a certain type of data and aggregation, what have you, and say, hey, just learn on my data and alert me to things that are outside of a spread of normal for this process, this machine, this user, kind of however you want to look at the data. All that anomaly detection is based in. It's really a cool Swiss Army knife that people can use to power their threat hunting operation using just pure anomaly detection stuff. And that's something we'll be. It's a cool Swiss Army knife. Not everyone's capable of operating a Swiss Army knife. Many of our users entrust us to tell them what to go look for. So a thing that we do in Elastic Security is try to provide some like pre-baked machine learning jobs. Like, hey, these ML recipes, so to speak, have security value. You might want to try these out in your data and see if you find anything cool. And so it's again a lot how we operate in some of the EQL-based analytics, where we provide a library of hundreds of these things. You can create your own if you want. Some of our users do. Some of them just want us to tell them what to go look for because they trust us. Same type of thing when it comes to anomaly detection. So I think that's one really good example of a way where we can broaden our horizons, so to speak, in the capability we can bring to bear with merging and joining forces with the SIM.
And how does threat intelligence, to speak to all of my quadrants, right? How does threat intelligence come into the mix? Did Endgame have previously its own threat intelligence kind of feeds? And I'm sure in the Elastic and the SIM side, right? I can imagine those are coming together.
Yeah, and we're talking about what's duplicative and what we can share in terms of stuff that we ingest and what we produce. So that's, I wouldn't say we got that whole picture completely figured out yet, but it's something we'll iron out in the coming months. A SIM, one clear use case for a SIM is helping you do your threat intelligence matching. And so there's some features, in the SIM and on the roadmap for the SIM as far as, doing automatic threat intel enrichment. As we start to, there's going to be, I think you know this, Paul, but we don't have like a threat intelligence feed that's publicly facing out of Endgame, and Elastic doesn't either. No immediate plans to do anything like that. We're continuing to focus on improving our understanding of what's going on out there in the universe, and to create our own detections. And so, yeah, there's definitely conversation back and forth between the two teams on that front. Nothing that exciting to announce yet, but someday I think we'll probably find some pretty interesting things and have some announcements for you on that front as well.
Yeah, but I like how it's behavior based as well, right? Because I find some of the threat intelligence stuff is way too specific, right?
Yeah,
but if you create that machine learning schema, that has a potential of detecting a number of different threats.
Yeah, I mean it's a checkbox. You gotta give your users a way to use their threat intel feeds. So yeah, has this domain ever been an attempt to resolve it ever happened on my network? Anyone talk to this IP? Like, these things are important to be able to do. They're completely uninteresting, if you ask me. They're features that have to exist. Users need them. But it's not how we spend our time, because they're rear view mirror activities. Good adversaries have moved off that infrastructure. They're using unique infrastructure per victim. They're compromising infrastructure and using that. So it's really not useful for detection of novel threats. It's to me a necessary checkbox, a necessary feature. We got to do it. We will do it. But
it finds the lazy attackers, right?
Yeah, exactly. It finds a lazy attacker. It finds people just picking off tools and not making any kind of modifications to them. You got to do it, but it's not, it's pretty much the lowest possible bar of detection.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we see this with this AV comparison report as well, right? Where that approach is actually the right approach. I mean, if you look at this report that you guys sent over as well, kind of where you stack in the AV comparisons, what you see is that approach is paying off, because you're collecting, you're detecting a lot of stuff that maybe some of the other vendors aren't, because you're using that kind of approach.
Yeah, and that's AV Comparatives. We're referring to they just put out a fact sheet. We've been in their testing for a while. I think we first got certified by them in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. They're a really good AV testing firm. Many of the bigger names, your traditional endpoint vendors, and some of the, I guess I hate the word next gen, but some people bucket us in that basket. So sure, do it. But some of the more advanced EPP providers were in there as well. They got some really good testing methodologies where they test a vendor's performance against emergent malware. They do a lot of work to pick things off of fresh C2 and then go test it right away. So basically, vendors can't. I won't say cheat, but can't use their signature-driven processes that are kind of, again, rear-view mirror facing. And a report just went out on their website, ab-comparatives, I think .org, that you can look at. And we perform great. One of the key things that came out of that report for us is that we've got a lot of users operating in hybrid environments. Maybe they're in a coffee shop, not connected to the internet. Maybe they're on a plane. we have people on submarines and other ship vessels that don't have internet connection for 6 months. So we try to make our stuff as effective as possible in isolation, not requiring the cloud. And really happy that I think we got like 99.8% of all the emergent malware they tested with. I think we missed one sample over 2 months that they were throwing at us in this test. We nailed it with our preventative capabilities and these antivirus capabilities that we ship with Elastic Endpoint Security. And some other vendors didn't fare quite so well, significantly less well, and in part due to problems with their cloud intelligence services, things like that. I mean, if you're relying on like cloud lookups for a huge part of your prevention, you better hope you got really good, reliable SLAs for those services, because when they go down, efficacy tanks. And that particular report really highlights that problem and some of the strengths of our approach of making. We want to have our core preventative technology live in isolation, in line on our endpoint. It's really fast that way, but it's also kind of resilient to connectivity problems and things of that nature.
Well, and that's a good direction to go in, Mark. As many of our listeners evaluate their endpoint security strategy, which product should they use? Again, maybe coming off of an adversary simulation test, they decide that we've got a lot of the other bases pretty well covered, but the area that's really lacking is our endpoint security. How do they go about evaluating endpoint security?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we try to participate a lot, and we'll be doing this at Elastic, is participate in third-party testing. There are some good third-party testing firms out there. We've chosen to go with AD Comparatives and NSS Labs for our anti-malware testing efficacy, and the MITRE EDR evaluations is really the gold standard for like EDR tech capabilities. What's your data visibility, and how can you detect things post-compromise? We did the MITRE test in 2018, and there's another round of testing ongoing right now against, I think, 22 different vendors are participating in this year's MITRE test. And so results for that will be coming out next year. And we'll see another round of NSS, and AV Comparatives does a report every other month that you can read. So you should look at your competitive testing. Endgame is front and center on those, and very proud of our performance. And some third-party assessments and analysts usually have good things to say about how Endgame does in that testing. I do think that there is an element of it is hard to test these products. I do think adversary simulation is great. There's some good tooling out there, the Atomic Red Team framework, some other ones, they can do a good job. If you've got an internal red team, throw it at a product. I think that's the best way to separate what's good from what's bad, because you can really get into some of the hey, how good are you at stopping these advanced fileless type attacks, these living off the land attacks? It kind of gets you away from being able to signature easy, tools and things like Atomic Red. Kind of easy for vendors to signature that, pretty dang hard to have somebody detect a custom .NET reflection attack. Good luck blocking that with anybody but Endgame. So if you got the resources for that, do it. If you don't, I think the third-party test results are actually pretty good. They're pretty informative. So test what you can yourself with some of these simulation tools, and really do test the functionality, the usability, kind of the ease of use for threat hunting operations. That's really important. And certainly do take a look at, hey, how much is it going to cost me to look back through this data? How's this going to work for me? I mean, a lot of the previous Endgame customers were already using Elastic for a SIM. Other SIM solutions were certainly in place as well. And dare I say, many of the budgets people had for those SIM solutions was much higher than what they had to pay for even a per endpoint capability, because it's incredibly expensive to try to use a standalone SIM tool for data storage for any reasonable length of time. And if your endpoint vendor is saying, yeah, we've got your cloud data streaming covered, make sure to check the fine print and see if they're telling you something like, hey, yeah, this price actually gives you 7 days of data storage. Anything more than that's going to cost you about, some massive multiplier to actually get you anywhere close to 180 days of look back. So I think a really important part of an eval is okay, let's look at the cohesive picture. Where am I going to store the data? For how long can I store it? What's that going to cost me? How do I interact with that data? Think about those questions too, because those are questions you might forget to ask if you're just doing a myopic anti-malware evaluation. Look at the whole picture. How are you going to prevent? What's my data going to be? How am I going to put it out the network? How am I going to query it? And how am I going to respond? because you really got to have that end-to-end story in mind when you're evaluating your tooling.
That's a great comprehensive guide to evaluation, right? You touched on all the areas, right? You look at the comparisons, you talk to the analysts. If your internal red team or your internal security team can basically bypass it with off-the-shelf tools, even without slight modifications or with slight modifications, I mean, that could very well just disqualify it right there, right? And then think about your operating costs, your overall operations for that product, and if it's going to fit in your environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll plug, and I wish I had the name of the conference, the actual talk in mind. There was a guy from IU Health gave a talk at Circle CityCon in Indianapolis this year on how to evaluate security products. It was actually incredible. Let me, if I can't find it in the next 2 seconds, I'll try to get it to you. Maybe you can throw it in the show notes. Sure. It's a really good watch for people who are thinking about how to do an eval. Really went through kind of soup to nuts this person's perspective on what they saw and what was snake oil and what sort of things to ask. It was excellent. I can't find it right now. I'll see if we can get that to you.
That's awesome.
That's great. Yeah, because I think that's what organizations struggle with, right? You get caught around the marketing axle a little bit, and you know, you've got to validate, you know, these different solutions.
Some level of validation
to really make sure it's going to fit into your environment, that it's going to do the things you want it to do, that it's cost effective as part of your overall security program. Again, that's where I think the beauty of the integration of Elastic and Endgame, from that operational ease, the ability to bring all that stuff together, that has a lot of benefit to an organization instead of managing multiple products in the environment.
And so many times, you know, you hear the advanced pen test teams go, well, you know, we bypassed this thing, but, you know, had you just enabled these couple, you know, configuration items here, you probably would have caught it. But like getting down to that configuration items and doing that is so hard that most people don't do it. So usability is a huge factor.
Yep, no doubt.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much for appearing on the show. Folks can go to securityweekly.com/elastic and find out more information and view all of the segments. And /Endgame will still work. It's all consolidated on the same page and everything will be updated. So securityweekly.com/elastic. Mark, thank you again.
All right. Thanks again. Talk to you again soon.
And that will conclude the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time. Over and out.